Chapter 26, How to Use Talent. After witnessing the signs of the slaughter of the untouchable killers gradually disappear, the gladiators dispersed in the cave and began to rest. Qin Xia closed his eyes and explored his psychic talent once again. Now he is very sure that the stability of his psychic talent is 100%, which is absolute, not relative. He had been unable to confirm this before, firstly because neither the White Scars nor the Grey Knights had ever given him formal training, nor had they conducted in-depth exploration of his abilities, and secondly because he had a sense of loss every time he used his psychic powers. After that trip to the subspace, Qin Xia began to explore his potential with confidence, including new Shinik moves and random ways to use Shinik powers. Burying Caesar by splitting the rock wall and using heat energy to carve the rope of triumph for Angron are both explorations and results of this random way of using psychic energy. The ultimate goal of the randomization of the use of psychic power is to literally achieve wishes come true and words come true. There is no need to follow a specific way of using psychic power, and no need for a long period of preparation. You can directly use the characteristics of psychic power to distort reality to accomplish things that are difficult or even impossible to do with physical means. Beyond the ordinary. Mind is stronger than matter. Matter is affected by mind. I was never an idealist. This sentence popped up in Qin Xia's mind. This caused him to stop exploring his own potential and he had to shift his attention to thinking about this new psychological problem. Qin Xia felt that his fate was very dramatic. He was once a technology developer who changed the fate of many people through technology and knowledge. But now he has become a user of idealistic power. Should I completely give up on learning material science and technology knowledge and devote myself entirely to the field of psychic power, or should I only use psychic power as an aid and focus on science and technology? Qin Xia fell into awkward thinking. In the end, he suddenly felt that there was no need for him to think about this problem at all. In this universe, material technology exists and is necessary in the real universe, while idealistic psychic power exists in the subspace and is also useful. Why do we have to choose between these two options? I want it all. Qin Xia thought. Use the advantages of psychic power to feed back into the study and research of science and technology, with technology in one hand and psychic power in the other. Just like the Latvarian god, Dr. Doom, who has magic in one hand and technology in the other. All-rounder. Qin Xia stopped worrying about it and turned his attention back to the business. He began to try to use psychic powers to penetrate the reality around him and observe the changes in reality. Although he was sitting here, his eyes had left his body and were observing the most microscopic changes that psychic energy brought to reality from a new perspective that was completely different from the physical perspective. Through these changes and more attempts, we can explore other ways and effects of distorting reality. Qin Xia had previously developed the ability to twist other people's heads 180 degrees through his research. The principle is to make a force appear out of thin air, apply it to the target, and control it at will, so as to achieve the effect of twisting the neck to 180 degrees, as if it was bent like this by someone. This principle can also be used to do other things, such as picking up objects from a distance, pushing or pulling something from a distance. But it is not enough to just know the principles and come up with an idea. You also need to verify the feasibility of the idea through more attempts and observations, and then conduct continuous simulations in the spiritual world to ultimately achieve the result of mastering a way to use psychic power. During this process of continuous research, Qin Xia noticed that Angron was in deep thought and seemed to be sad. Qin Xia also wanted to take a break, so he stopped studying and opened his eyes to ask about Angron's condition. What's wrong? It's the same old thing. Angron looked at the ground and said in a deep voice, since I've been around so many people, I've always been able to feel emotions and feelings that are not mine. You have to learn to tame your talent, Qin Xia said. Angron looked up, instantly interested. What should I do? Can you help me? Yes, but not yet. Qin Xia nodded, then shook his head, because your talent belongs to you, and we have only known each other for a few days. I have to do more research on your talent before I can find a way to help you. Angron nodded silently, looking a little disappointed. But I can teach you how to use your talent first. Qin Xia stood up and walked to Angron, reaching out to knock on the primarch's head. You can feel other people's emotions. Although this does not mean that you can read their minds, you can use this talent to make an extremely accurate psychological profile of others. Qin Xia turned around and glanced at Crest. The female gladiator was sleeping on the ground. What kind of person do you think Kleist is? Qin Xia asked. Bitch, Angron replied automatically. Noticing Qin Xia's expression was not right, Angron shrugged, "What's wrong?" "That's what she said herself when she apologized to you when she came down from the arena." Qin Xia was silent for a few seconds, sat next to Angron, and looked at Crest. Qin Xia used his limited knowledge of psychology and behavioral analysis to analyze Kleist. She is a very aggressive person, but this aggression is obviously related to the environment. She is one of the few female gladiators here. In order to avoid some trouble, she needs to act aggressively and not let herself be bullied. She must have grown up in a gladiatorial arena. Her figure and the scars on her body prove this. So her aggression is not only caused by the purpose of self-protection, but also by the influence of the people in her growing environment. But she is not a hateful person. She can afford to lose and admit defeat. She should have learned this generosity from a senior gladiator whom she thinks is very important. But of course, this openness and generosity is not entirely learned. Her own personality must also match this openness and generosity. I noticed that she was always paying attention to the others during the battle. Qin Xia analyzed it and finally concluded, in short, I think she is the classic type of person who is aggressive but delicate and caring about others. After hearing this analysis, Angron didn't know how to verify it. Wait for verification. Qin Xia patted Angron's shoulder and reminded him in a low voice. At this time, Crest got up from the ground, turned around and rolled his eyes at Qin Xia, then looked at Angron and said, "People with ink in their belly will talk. But I'm sorry, others really can't see what my inner character is like, so don't listen to him." After saying that, Crest turned and walked to the wall opposite him, leaning against it and continuing to pretend to sleep. Angron looked at Qin Xia in surprise. When Crest woke up from her pretended sleep and refuted his words, Angron felt many emotions from the female gladiator: anger, surprise, confusion, and concealment. So Kleist was lying, and she was being lied to, or at least most of it. "Look." Qin Xia spread his hands. "Your talent allows you to perceive more than me. Everyone has emotions when doing things. You can judge a person's inner thoughts by capturing and analyzing these emotions. You can even do what I can't do, which is that you can directly determine whether a person can be trusted or not." Angron suddenly realized, "I see." Qin Xia smiled and nodded, "Study your talent and use it. You are born with the privilege of empathizing with others and gaining their trust and love. You also have the ability to love others because of empathy. Don't lose your talent, and don't let your talent control you in turn." There were parts of this sentence that Angron couldn't understand yet. He still needed education and growth. After all, he was probably only a few years old. After keeping these words in mind, Angron suddenly asked, "But I can't sense your emotions. How do you manage not to have any emotions?" "My emotions are rich and even stubborn. Some people have tried to turn me into a cold machine, but they all failed." Qin Xia stood up and rubbed Angron's head with both hands, messing up his thick curly hair. "You can't feel my emotions, so you must not be paying attention." After watching Qin Xia return to her previous position, sit cross-legged and close her eyes, Angron stroked her messed up hair. He felt that Qin Xia was an emotional person who sometimes even wanted to play pranks. Like ruffling your hair. But Angron still found that he could not sense Qin Xia's emotions, no matter what the time was. Chapter 27. Caring and being cared for. The next day, the gates of the caves that housed the gladiators were opened, and the slaves who had brought food on feast day were now back. However, today was not a feast day before a big fight, so the slaves only brought some very ordinary food. For example, the bread and fresh water that Ono gave to Qin Xia and Angron. Qin Xia paid a little more attention and found that the female slave whose son was a gladiator had also come. Distribute the food and fresh water. The female slave was obviously a slave of a very high status. She spoke softly to the slaves she brought with her in a decent manner. Then each gladiator received food and fresh water. Qin Xia noticed that the food and fresh water were placed in a square package, one portion for each person. This means that the food that Ono had given out before belonged to him and was thrown out by him, rather than shared by the gladiators. "Gentlemen." The slave girl saluted the gladiators and said politely, "The regular gladiatorial schedule for the next few days has been announced." Just as he finished speaking, a little boy who looked only 11 years old walked into the cave. The boy didn't dare to look at the gladiators, he was afraid of these executioners. While avoiding all eyes, the boy came to the gate and prepared to stick the gladiatorial schedule in his hand on it. When the boy tried his best and could only stick the schedule at a height of about 1.2 meters, Ono came forward to help him stick the schedule at a height that was easier to read for the gladiators. "Thank you," the boy whispered. "My brother will always be your age in my memory." Honor squatted down and looked at the boy. "What's your name, buddy?" "Yakyuka," the boy answered. "Okay, Yakyuka." Ono motioned the boy to look at the other gladiators. "We are just forced to stay here. We are not bad people, so you don't have to be afraid next time." The boy turned and looked at the gladiators around him. Kleist smiled at him. Qinxia sat cross-legged with his eyes closed. Angron nodded. When Yakyuka's eyes fell on a pair of twin gladiators standing in the middle of the cave, the cold look in the twin gladiators' eyes made Yakyuka shudder. But Yakyuka still insisted on looking around, then nodded to Ono. "Yet." While the two were talking, a high-ranking slave girl came to Angron with 2 packages of food. When Angron looked up at her, the slave girl smiled and handed over 2 packages. The person in charge said you should eat and drink enough before going on stage. After saying this, the slave girl turned to look at her son. It was obvious that there was something she wanted to say, but she was hesitating whether or not to say it. Angron had his own curiosity, so he spoke first. "Madam, what is your son's name?" "His name is Yakula, and he is only 17 years old. He is not a warrior, and he has not received much combat training. He just became a gladiator a month earlier than you and the gentleman next to you." Hearing the slave girl say her son's name is Yochula, Angron pointed to the teenage boy named Yakyuka and asked, "Are they brothers?" "Yes." Yakula came to his mother's side and nodded vigorously. "Yes, he is my brother." But Yakula's mother did not admit it immediately. After a half-second of silence, a trace of sadness flashed across the slave girl's face, and then she nodded silently. "Yes, sir. But Yakyuka is my adopted son, his parents." Halfway through her words, Yakula's mother swallowed the rest of her words. "Ma'am." Kleist came close to Yakula's mother. "When does the postponed carnival start? It's been a month since the girl from Mok City met me. I can't wait to see her again." Hearing this, the slave girl looked at Crest. She only realized now that this was a lady. After being slightly shocked, the slave girl shook her head and said, "The person in charge said that the carnival day before your battle with the slaughterer has been completely cancelled. It will be cancelled until the next time you have a large-scale fight." "What's the reason for the cancellation?" Crest's expression changed instantly. He grabbed the slave girl's arm and pulled her towards him. "If you can't explain it clearly, you have to stay here with me today. Let my mother go." Yakula pushed Kleist away. Crest smiled and said, "Don't be nervous, kid. I'm just joking. I really don't dare to touch the slave girl who was said to be the maid of the chief of the Tark family. Can you please stop pretending to be a man and aggressive just to protect yourself at this time?" Qinxia said helplessly. "Crest, you don't have to do this. We will all protect you." Qinxia's words removed the mask on Crest's face and he fell silent. She thought about it and felt that it was true. "Sorry, I'm used to this." Crest lowered his head and said dejectedly, "It's not me who needs a carnival day here, but my good buddies always need one." The slave girl pulled her son behind her and faced Crest, pretending to be strong. "The person in charge said that this carnival day is cancelled. How can I know the reason? Will he tell me what he is planning instead of letting his personal slave convey the order directly?" Kleist was speechless. The slave girl looked at the others and said, "The person in charge's personal slave said that as compensation, in addition to food, there are also 2 bundles of bandages in the supply bag." Hearing that there were bandages, the gladiators were all stunned, and then quickly opened the supply packs they had received to check what was inside. When the gladiators saw 2 bundles of fluorescent bandages inside, they burst into cheers. The cheers were louder and more cheerful than those of the spectators watching the fights. 2 bundles of bandages. Qinxia picked up the bandage roll that was flashing with fluorescence and looked at it in confusion. He could find that it contained a certain amount of radioactivity, but he didn't know why the gladiators would cheer for it. "If I were you, I would hide the bandage roll." Ono walked over and said, "This thing can heal any wound. Even if you were stabbed 3 times with 6 holes, as long as it is not fatal, it can still heal it." Although he thought it was outrageous, Qinxia didn't think Ono was lying. In his opinion, this bandage is similar to the anesthetic among the 3 treasures of Nuseria, which is the proof that the advanced technology of this hellhole of Nuseria is in the hands of the nobles. Slavery, brutal gladiatorial combat, slums. A godlike ruler armed with high technology, with technology so advanced that it is astonishing. Qin Xia suddenly thought of Ultramar. Nuseria is not very far from the 500 worlds of Ultramar in later generations. Compared with Ultramar, which has a strong Roman flavor, Nuseria also has a strong Roman flavor. It's just that Nuseria represents the darkest and cruelest side of Rome. Yukula. The slave girl pulled her son to a place far away from Angron and gently told him, "The first regular fight this afternoon is for you, Mr. Angron, and Ms. Crest. You will fight the Nasa twins and the Skinner. You must follow behind Mr. Angron. He is also a newcomer, but I think he can protect you, and he will." The slave girl lowered her voice while saying this, not wanting Angron to hear. There's nothing shameful about saying this, but it always makes people feel like there's some kind of transaction involved. But Angron heard it all the same. Not to mention whispering in the cave, even the words of the spectators sitting in the audience seats in the arena could be vaguely heard by the primarch. The emotions this mother felt towards her gladiator son at this time: worry, love, concern. Compared to the emotions that the gladiators would have, the mother's emotions warmed Angron. "I will protect him," Angron suddenly said to the slave girl, "if only for the extra piece of bread given to me by those who care for him." "Thank you." The slave girl was stunned for a moment and then quickly thanked him. She turned around and left with the others. Before leaving, she stuck out her tongue and quickened her pace. Chapter 28. Conventional Fight. It's a pity that large-scale fights of astonishing intensity don't happen every day. But today's regular fights can still satisfy the bloodthirsty heart of every Nuseria. Let us welcome the gladiators who will participate in the fights next. The Prince of the Mountains, the man who has been the center of attention since the first day he became a gladiator. Angron. Qin Xia frowned as he listened to the host's drawn-out announcement. He had always been dissatisfied with this way of announcing programs. Thunderous cheers have been heard in the arena, and the gladiators are about to take the stage. This is a regular fight. We don't have to fight to the death. Ono rubbed Angron's muscles and glanced at the twin gladiators who had already walked out of the cave to the armory. "Show mercy, but be careful. Kill those who need to be killed." "Why?" Angron wondered. "Don't those people out there want to see us kill each other?" "They want to, but not everyone can be a gladiator." Ono smiled and shook his head. "If you want to replenish the number of gladiators, you can't just grab anyone. The arena must ensure that the gladiators' unnecessary casualties are reduced. It is enough to determine the winner in non-large-scale gladiatorial fights." After that, Ono looked at Yukula again and said in a very serious tone, "The Skinner and the Nasa twins have never killed anyone else, but we still have to be careful ourselves, do you understand?" Yukula nodded. Then the young gladiator who was entrusted to Angron by his mother squatted in front of Qin Xia, staring at Qin Xia from under his golden curly hair. "Can you please bless me?" "Blessing?" Qin Xia was puzzled. "My mother said that wizards can bless others." Yukula said, "If you can bless me, I think I can definitely survive in the arena until one day I leave here, and take my mother and my brother with me." Qin Xia nodded, stretched out his hand and pressed it on Yukula's head. "May you live." Yukula closed his eyes, as if he could really feel some magical power being exerted on him. He felt it carefully, then opened his eyes, stood up with a determined look, and walked to Angron's side. "I will protect you too, kid." Kleist, who was also assigned to play, patted Yukula on the shoulder. "If you survive, tell me your mother's name." Yukula gave Kleist a cold look and left the cave. Angron and Crest nodded to Qin Xia and left the cave together. The gladiators who were going to participate in regular gladiatorial fights were escorted by security robots to the armory to choose their weapons. Angron took 2 axes, Crest took the spear she was best at as usual, and Yukula took the harpoon and fishing net. When they left the armory and headed towards the corridor leading to the fighting area of the arena, the 3 encountered the Nasa twins who had already picked up their weapons, and a gladiator named Flayed One. The Nusa twins are good at using fishing nets and harpoons, and they work well together. Kleist came close to Yukula and reminded him in a low voice with a serious expression. "As for the Skinner, no one knows his real name. All we know is that he is good at using 2 daggers and can peel off a person's skin completely during a fight." Hearing this, Yukula immediately became nervous and subconsciously held his breath. Yukula, who became a gladiator earlier than Angron and Qin Xia, knew the abilities of the Nasa twins and the Skinner. The reason he was nervous was precisely because he knew too well what the other party was capable of. Yukula read the information of all the gladiators before becoming a gladiator. As if sensing the fear spreading from the young man, the Skinner standing in front turned around and showed a gentle smile on his pale face. "Don't be afraid, kid. We don't need to fight to the death today. We just need to decide the winner and come back to carve the rope of victory." The Skinner has a very creepy appearance, with pale skin and black curly hair that is always wet. He is not very tall and always smiles grimly. But now, the smile on the Skinner's face looked very gentle and reassuring. Thank you, sir." Yukila tried to force a smile. The Skinner nodded slightly, raised his hand and patted his chest, then pointed at Yukila, meaning, "I'll protect you." At this time, the Nasa twins also turned around and smiled. The gladiator family is quite warm. But Angron, who was at the end of the team, frowned. The fight soon begins. Qin Xia, who was still in the cave, did not sit cross-legged and busy himself with his own affairs. Instead, he went to the window and looked down at the fighting arena. Ono said the arena was underground, but the view outside the window was from a bird's eye view. Qin Xia discovered that this window was not actually a window, it was just a ventilation duct disguised as a window using holographic technology. In a gladiatorial fight, if one side is defeated but still alive, will the nobles or the audience stand up and give a thumbs up to decide whether the gladiator is dead or alive? Qin Xia suddenly asked Ono, who also came over. Large-scale gladiatorial games, but these regular gladiatorial games are basically just competitions and exchanges, Ono answered. The style of the gladiatorial arena is usually to leave people to die in large-scale gladiatorial games. Qin Xia nodded and watched in silence. The gladiators were divided into two teams and faced each other, half a meter apart. The maggot eye hovered up and down, presenting every person in the fight on the holographic projection with the best shooting angle, so that people at the back of the audience and those who were not present to watch the fight could also see clearly. The fight begins. At the command of Maggot Eye, the deep sound of horns echoed in the arena. Angron was facing the Nasa twins, so naturally he picked up his axe and went to deal with the twin gladiators first. The Nasa twins first covered Crest with a fishing net, and then dealt with Angron. As for the Skinner, he and Yukila himself came together intentionally or unintentionally. Although this conventional gladiatorial fight was more like a competition, the gladiators still had to fight well, at least not to make the audience feel that the fight was too fake. It was a smart decision to choose the harpoon. The Skinner stood with his feet together on the red sand, and the smile on his face looked so gentle and friendly in Yukila's eyes at this moment. "I heard that you were a fishing slave in the artificial sea before you became a gladiator. You have no combat training, so it is wise for you to choose the tools you think are most useful. Like I used to be a worm skinner, so I chose a dagger. Let's take action." The Skinner motioned for Yukila to attack him. "I'll teach you 2 moves." "Yes." Yukila immediately stepped forward and stabbed the Skinner with the harpoon in his hand. The Skinner dodged it easily, then cut off Yukila's right arm as he was about to finish his move. The dagger in the Skinner's hand was extremely sharp. When Yukila found that his right arm was gone, he felt the excruciating pain. Chapter 29. Anger rising from the heart. The image of his right arm being cut off kept flashing back in Yukila's mind. A dagger could not cut off a limb so easily, so the Skinner stabbed it precisely into the gap between the bones, cutting off the tendons connecting the bones, and dismantled Yukila's arm like a butcher cutting up an ox. In addition to pain, there was also surprise and confusion in Yukila's mind. He didn't expect that the Skinner would cut off his arm right away. This guy was talking and laughing just now. You must be thinking of escaping just like the big guy and the others. The Skinner glanced at Angron, who was struggling with the Nasa twins, and with one hand holding a dagger, he stabbed Yukila's arm and lifted it up, and with the other hand holding a dagger, he quickly cut the entire arm apart. Skin, muscles, tendons, all of these were peeled off and fell into the already red sand. Even if Yukila had a bandage, it would be impossible to reattach the arm. "I'm different from you." The Skinner still smiled. "I enjoy fighting, I enjoy cheering." Only now was Yukila certain that this man really wanted to kill him. "If you all run away. Who am I skinning?" The Skinner kept smiling as he spoke, but to Yukila he felt like a ghost. You. Yukila retreated tremblingly. This young gladiator might have been prepared for killing. When facing the untouchable slaughterer, he also killed a slave knight. But Yukila never thought that one of the gladiators who fought with him against the slave knight on the red sand, the gladiator named Flayed One who had just comforted him, was actually here to kill him completely. In this gladiatorial contest, it is not necessarily a fight to the death. When your mother comes to deliver food in the evening, I will describe to her in detail how I skinned you. The skinner put away his smile and rushed towards Yukula. The other side. Angron dodged the Nasa twins' successive attacks. Crest had just cut the fishing net and rushed towards the twins, yelling and cursing. Angron didn't want to kill anyone, because no one had to die today, so he kept dodging, occasionally attacking, and then dodging again. The cheers in the audience turned into curses. The audience who came to see Angron's outstanding performance now turned their previous praises into insults that were unbearable to the ear because Angron was obviously slacking off. Angron easily dodged the harpoons that the Nasa twins stabbed at the same time, but just as Angron was about to pretend to fight back, one of them suddenly pulled out a dagger from his boot and slashed Angron's neck. Angron took 2 steps back and touched his neck. The skin is broken. You. Just as Angron was about to question him, the Nasa twins quickly stepped forward and stabbed Angron's left and right shoulders with their harpoons. Are you crazy? Crest swung his spear to cut off the 2 harpoons and dodged in front of Angron. You want to kill him? The Nusa twins retreated in unison, turned to look at the audience, and then looked back at Crest at the same time. Isn't it good that he died? That way my brother, I and you will still be the center of attention. The 2 brothers each spoke a sentence. What bullshit are you talking about? Crest cursed, and walked around Angron, chasing away the Nasa twins who were ready to attack him at any time like chasing away wild beasts. He is big, but he still gives people the feeling of a child. He's not a kid. Well, maybe. But even if he's young, he's still a freak over 3 meters tall, so don't say those childish things. The Nasa twins, one raised a dagger and the other raised a spare fishing net, ready to attack again. You 2 are useless bastards who have no eyes for giving birth to children. Crest clenched his spear and prepared to teach the 2 brothers a lesson. But Angron's large hand rested on Crest's shoulder. The female gladiator looked back and saw Angron glancing in Yakura's direction. After a little hesitation, Crest, who believed that Angron could handle the 2 brothers, left the Primarch's side and rushed towards Yakura, who was fleeing and hiding from the flayer in the arena. Angron must be wondering now. Ono frowned. Why did the gladiator who fought side by side with the slayer yesterday and laughed at him want to kill him today? Were the Nasa twins the most popular before? Qin Xia asked. Ono nodded. Qin Xia didn't ask any more questions and turned around to look at the other gladiators behind him. Some gladiators were also angry at the actions of the Nusa twins and the flayers. Some people are indifferent. Some people sat in the corner with cold eyes. When Qin Xia's eyes met theirs, these people showed sinister smiles. Qin Xia turned around and continued to look at the arena, only letting out a sigh. There are bad guys in Gladiator. Angron, who was being stared at by Qin Xia, was indeed very confused. He could sense many emotions from the 2 brothers, jealousy, hostility, cruelty, and coldness. But just feeling the emotions was not enough for Angron to understand why these 2 people wanted to kill him. It just made him certain that they wanted to kill him. Puzzled. Wronged. There are also various other emotions gathered together, and when these negative emotions accumulate to the maximum, it is the anger that makes people want to kill as soon as possible. Just like when an ordinary person is bullied, he will feel so angry that he wants to kill the bully's entire family. As the saying goes, anger comes from the heart. I will tear you to pieces. Angron roared, threw the 2 axes in his hands to the ground, ignored the harpoon stuck in his shoulders, and rushed straight towards the Nasa twins. Angron had a ferocious expression, his eyebrows were raised like swords, and his eyes seemed to be able to spit out flames. The moment they saw his expression, the Nasa twins had already thought of dodging. But before the thought could be transmitted through the nerves to the body, the 2 brothers were strangled by Angron, who rushed over. While the brothers' bodies were still mechanically dodging, Angron swung his arms toward the center, bringing them together. There was a sound of bones breaking, and the 2 brothers' heads hit each other and died at the same time. Blood splattered on the Primarch's face. As the first drop of blood slid down Angron's face onto the red sand, the hideousness and anger in the Primarch's face also disappeared. In the moments before the brothers died, Angron felt many emotions. Regret, fear, dread, shock, surprise. Angron felt the pain and the heartache at the moment of death at the same time. A tear fell from Angron's eye, mixing with the blood and bone fragments on his face and sliding onto the red sand. Those were not the Primarch's tears, but the dying tears of 2 dead men, flowing only from Angron's eyes. The Primarch stood where he was, took a heavy breath, threw away the corpse in his hand, lowered his head, and it was unknown what he was thinking about. Chapter 30. Anger. The flayers are still hunting Yukula. When Yukula tripped over a stone on the red sand and fell to the ground, looking back in despair at the skinner who had pounced on him, a spear pierced the skinner's chest. Crest stood behind the skinner with a ferocious look on his face, and the muscular lines on his strong arms were more obvious as he held the spear. Valkyrie. A word popped into Yukula's mind. At a very young age, Yukula would be held in her mother's arms as she told stories of their people who had been massacred and enslaved by the Desias. Among them is the story of the Valkyrie, a woman skilled in warfare who was promoted to god because of her military exploits. Kleist's appearance is obviously different from that of the Valkyrie. The Valkyrie is muscular with graceful feminine lines, while Kleist is just strong. But this did not prevent Yukula from thinking that Kleist, who had saved him, was a Valkyrie in his eyes. Stand up! Kleist pulled the spear from the corpse, the ferocious expression on his face was replaced by concern, and his bloody hand reached out to Yukula. Yukula held Crest's hand, and just when he was about to use the force to stand up, Crest pulled him up easily like a child. Angron. Crest turned and waved to the primarch. The maggot eye had already emitted the host's announcement that the fight was over, and the cheers of the audience had been ringing for quite some time. But Angron remained where he was, motionless. We should go back. Crest walked towards Angron. The next second an axe flew over and landed in front of Crest. Crest was shocked. He thought that Angron also wanted to kill those who suffered the same fate as him. But she thought otherwise when she saw the concerned look on Angron's face. Angron bowed his head again. The maggot eye flew in front of Angron. Mr. Angron Tark, please give us your opinion on the gladiatorial fight. Before the host could finish his words, Angron suddenly stretched out his hand and crushed the maggot eye. When the audience saw this gifted gladiator crush the maggot eye, which was made of the same material as the Iron Man, the cheers suddenly stopped and then became more intense. Angron raised his head, a ferocious and fierce expression on his face. The primarch pulled out the harpoon from his shoulder and threw it towards the audience seats in the distance. The harpoon instantly crossed a distance of nearly 1,000 meters and flew straight towards the audience, but was blocked by an invisible energy barrier on the way. Angron drew his other harpoon from his shoulder and hurled it with the same result. Far from feeling scared or angry, the audience cheered for Angron even more enthusiastically. An alarm sounded, more piercing than the cheers of the audience that shook the arena. 10 security robots penetrated the invisible barrier and entered the battle area in an orderly manner, ready to suppress Angron by force. He seems crazy. Crest took a step back, distanced himself from Angron, and subconsciously blocked Yukula behind him. Xia and Ono in the cave were watching Angron's reaction and guessing what he was thinking. He is furious. Ono was very nervous. He shouldn't resist now. If he resists now, he will only be beaten by the security robot and unable to move. Xia nodded, thought about it, and shook his head again. He seems to want to do something. As he spoke, Angron had already rushed towards the security omnic. The primarch ran at high speed, like a terrifying beast. Although he was still young, although he had not yet grown to his peak physical state, he was still a primarch. The first security robot had just raised its electric baton when Angron tore off its arms with his bare hands and smashed its head with a punch, causing an explosion. In the flickering fire, the Iron Man's metal fragments pierced Angron's face, and his fists were cut by the metal, but these made him stronger. The rage in the primarch's heart burned like a star over Nuseria. The words roared out in his heart were like fuel, making the anger burn more persistently and vigorously. He didn't want to kill anyone. He didn't want to be locked in the arena. He wanted to run freely in the mountains. But why is everything forcing him to kill and making him restricted in his freedom? Those pointy-eared bastards who came to kill him when he climbed out of the amniotic fluid chamber, the slave-catching team that knocked him down with anesthetics and caught him, those who had to attack him because they wanted to survive, and those gladiators who had fought together before but became hostile to him afterwards. Confusion, pain, powerlessness, these negative emotions will eventually turn into anger that needs to be vented. This is true for mortals, and it is also true for Angron. The second security robot had its head pierced by its own arm. The third security omnic was torn to pieces by Angron. The other security robots were also unable to hold out for long before being smashed one after another by Angron. But security intelligent machines are endless. When 10 security intelligent machines are destroyed, 100 will appear. If 100 of them would be shredded by Angron, though that was unlikely, 1,000 were already on their way to the battle area. If all the security robots are unable to stop Angron, even if this is simply impossible, there will be robots specifically used for combat that will be mobilized. And the High Knight's guards. And there are plenty of things on Nukria that can suppress resistance. The slavers enjoyed watching Angron get angry, for it was much more intense than the previous fight. As Angron destroyed more and more security robots, his strength gradually drained away and his rage was no longer as strong as it was at the beginning. The primarch stood on the mountain of debris, about to crush the next Omnic, when he was suddenly distracted by a strong emotion that had been affecting him. This emotion did not come from Angron himself, but from the audience. Excitement, appreciation, recognition. The crowd's voices shook the arena, and their emotions flooded over Angron. Angron gradually stopped his movements and looked towards the audience. His arms went up. It was like something was holding his hand. Finally the primarch raised his arms, raising them like a victor. The cheers intensified, as did the positive emotions Angron felt, and he felt himself bathed in a stream of warm water. But when Angron saw the red sand of the arena, his sanity gradually returned, and his eyes towards the audience were filled with hatred. Chapter 31. Philosophy. The gate in the cave opened with a roar. The security omnics escorted Angron, Crest, and Yakura back to the gladiator residence. Kleist helped Yakula, who had lost his arm, to walk to the stone and let Yakula sit down. Angron walked to the corner where Qinxia and Ono were and sat down dejectedly. Qinxia noticed that the primarch kept clenching his fists. Angron. Ono sat in front of Angron and opened his mouth to say some words of comfort. But Angron shook his head, obviously not wanting to be disturbed. This is also why Qinxia did not comfort Angron. The primarch needs rest and calm now. There was silence in the cave. Angron occasionally looked at the others, but his eyes were not filled with sympathy as before, but with a hint of caution. The primarch was not afraid that the gladiators here might be living happily together one second and want to kill him the next. He was not afraid of physical harm. What the primarch feared was being hurt emotionally again. Everyone was silent for a while. It was not Ono who finally broke the silence, but Angron himself. How cruel must the people in the audience be to cheer for one man to kill another? Angron asked. Qinxia had the answer, but he felt his answer was boring. They are not all aristocrats. Ono said calmly. Those cheering in the audience, in front of the TV and projection, are not all aristocrats. Almost all of them are low-class people from the slums, pariahs in the eyes of the nobles. Hearing this, Angron frowned, looking confused and puzzled. He couldn't understand why the common people, who were also victims of slavery and oppression, would be so happy to see the gladiators die. Almost all of them lead miserable lives every day. Their only pleasure is to return home at night after heavy labor, buy some wine, stand in front of the window and watch the projection on the street or the simple TV at home to watch the gladiatorial contests. Or spend several months' salary to buy the cheapest ticket and go to the most remote corner of the arena to watch the fight. Their lives are as good as their deaths. They are just zombies that can walk and eat. Ono said this and looked at Qinxia, then looked back at Angron. Watching us die makes them feel alive. Hearing this, Qinxia nodded to Ono. He also felt that this was the mentality of the Nukrians. Angron heard from Ono's words that he was trying to excuse the ordinary people of Nuseria. It was as if the ordinary people shared the same suffering as the gladiators and cheered for the fights only out of necessity. However, in Angron's opinion, they were nothing to be pitied. If he could escape one day, he would kill both the nobles and the commoners. If they have pity, they should pity us, not see life in our death, said Angron. The world is not black and white. Good people can also do evil things, and evil people are not necessarily unworthy of sympathy, let alone those miserable people in Nuseria. Ono advised. Angron shook his head at first, but did not directly refute. Because he didn't think everything Ono said was wrong, even from his perspective. Some of those people in the audience. Some people in the corner. The emotions hidden deep in their hearts, the negative emotions diluted by the excitement of fighting, made Angron feel the same depression and pain. Some people even have a feeling of worship, just like, seeing my beloved gladiator kill several people in the audience seats of the Colosseum, the whips hit by the nobles on me didn't hurt so much anymore. And when he had fought the untouchable slaughterers before, Angron had felt some desire, suppressed desire, and the most forbidden fantasy to let other nobles be slaughtered like those slaughterers. Of course, there is also the purest desire to witness killing. The more Angron thought about it, the more anxious he became. He scratched his scalp as if hurting himself, leaving streaks of blood under his thick hair. Why are people so complex? Why can't people just have one pure emotion? Why do those thugs who seem to be cheering for one person to kill another have so many different emotions? Angron was anxious, frantic. Feelings that were not his were gone now, but they tormented his mind all the time. Take a rest. Qin Xia said, I know what confuses you the most. When you calm down completely, I will teach you something else. Angron raised his head and stared at Qin Xia with his bloodshot eyes. His eyes were filled with helplessness and pleading. The primarch nodded slightly. Late at night, all the gladiators fell into a deep sleep. Except for Angron and Qin Xia. While Qin Xia was still sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, Angron stood up and walked gently to sit beside him. The primarch didn't know that Qin Xia was thinking about how to regenerate Yakula's severed arm. Although he has the ability to heal injuries, the methods he masters cannot allow a person who has lost a limb to grow it back. Give. Qin Xia heard Angron say this word, then he opened his eyes and looked at the hand Angron handed over. In the primarch's large hand lay something that existed inside the head of the security omnic. Something like a processor. You said you learned about science and technology when you were young. Angron smiled bitterly. I thought it might be useful to you, so I hid one of these during the day. If you need others, we can save them slowly. Thank you. Qin Xia took the processor and put it on the ground. The rock flows, hiding the processor within. Angron obviously didn't come here just for the processor. He opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. Then, finally, it was Qin Xia who took the initiative to speak. You want to ask me about what happened during the day? You are confused by your talent. You have always been confused, even tortured, and you want to find a solution. Yes. Angron nodded. The primarch was still thinking about his daytime affairs. Anger. The excitement that comes from cheers and appreciation. Is what Anonymous said right? Angron felt that he should not be so agitated by the cheers of his enemies, but he could not help it. Angron felt that what Qin Xia said last time about talent was right. He recalled the mood swings of the Nasa twins at that time. If he could have noticed this, he could have taken precautions in advance. It may take you a long time to learn. Qin Xia looked at the primarch seriously. Learn not to be affected by emotions, not to be affected by talents, but to control your talents and the emotions you feel, and not to be swayed by emotions and do irrational things. But now, at least you can learn one thing first. That's about figuring out which of the emotions you are feeling should be valued and experienced, and which ones should be ignored and minimized. Angron listened and nodded. Actually, what Onimamos said is correct. Qin Xia subconsciously glanced at the sleeping old bear. The common people of Nuseria also appreciate gladiatorial combat and even cheer for the death of gladiators, but this is indeed the only entertainment they have in their endless suffering. They don't necessarily all want to watch us die. Some of them will regard us as idols, regard us as spiritual pillars, and learn from the qualities we demonstrate. Of course, some of them are just curious and want to see all kinds of weird ways of dying. You have to realize the complexity and diversity of intelligent life. Hearing this, Angron followed Qin Xia's instructions before and felt the emotions. He began to imagine himself as an ordinary person, analyzing every emotion of the civilians in the audience seats of the Colosseum at that time, as well as the possible reasons behind each emotion. He recalled the emotion he felt again: admiration, trust, and reliance. There are indeed some people who regard gladiators as their spiritual support. They feel the pain of spending the money they have saved for a long time, but also the joy of seeing the people they like. Savor them. Qin Xia saw that Angron was learning. As for the emotions you should discard, those who just want to have fun and watch you brutally kill another group of people, the praise from these people is false and harmful. Qin Xia put his hand on Angron's shoulder and smiled. Only empathize with people who deserve your empathy, and enjoy their trust and appreciation for you, because you deserve it. As for what kind of person is worthy, this is something you will have to experience and learn in the future. It's not that I don't want to teach you with words, but compared to your talent of being able to dissect and appreciate a person spiritually, words are too inferior and not intuitive enough. After listening to Qin Xia's teachings, Angron nodded thoughtfully. He seemed to understand. But in fact I don't fully understand it. Angron is still too young, he still needs to learn and grow. But Angron must remember what Qin Xia said today, and then savor and draw lessons from it while learning and growing. There are bad guys in Gladiator. Qin Xia suddenly said, don't be sad about this. Angron nodded silently. And then you quickly learn another thing. After hearing what Qin Xia said, Angron looked confused, wondering what he would learn. Sometimes, being cruel is something we don't want to do, but it's necessary for us and for the people we care about. Qin Xia said. It is not enough for a good person to be gentle, kind, and tolerant. You can easily empathize with others, but you have to face battles and enemies, so you have to have a unique quality. A heart of a bodhisattva, a method of thunder and lightning. Chapter 32. Necessary cruelty. Anonymous. Anonymous. In Ono's dream, he and some warriors were carving triumphal ropes for each other, and while carving, they were talking about the deaths of those nobles. At this joyful moment, everything around him suddenly disappeared and Ono's dream changed. Old Bear saw Qin Xia. This is not a dream. When Ono wanted to ask, Qin Xia answered first. You know I'm a wizard. I can talk to you in dreams. Qin Xia said and motioned for Aonyo to sit down. The two sat opposite each other in the dream. Ono was very confused. He and Qin Xia were clearly in the cave, and he could have woken himself up to talk, but Qin Xia had to use witchcraft to communicate in a dream. However, the experienced Ono quickly guessed that the following conversation could not be known to others. What did you ask me to do? While Ono was thinking, another person appeared. Crest walked out of the darkness and sat down in front of the campfire that suddenly appeared in front of Qin Xia and Ono. The female gladiator yawned, looked around subconsciously, and then found that this was not a cave. Yes, you are in a dream and you haven't woken up. Qin Xia answered before Kleist asked, I just pulled you into a dream. What I'm going to say next is something we need to discuss in private. What are you talking about? So mysterious. Kleist immediately listened seriously. Do you remember what happened during the day? Qin Xia said, Yakila was almost killed by the Skinner, and the Nasa twins wanted to kill Angron. Kleist and Ono nodded at the same time. Of course they remembered. Next. Qin Xia focused his eyes on Ono alone, you have to propose a no-killing principle to the others. As the name suggests, no gladiator can kill each other in a regular fight. Ono was stunned at first, then nodded seriously, I am very happy to do so. But you are not the only one who has this idea. I also called on gladiators not to kill each other in regular gladiatorial combat, but they all ignored my words. I do not have the appeal and deterrence of you and Angron. It is precisely because you didn't, that I need you to bring this up. Qin Xia signaled Ono to listen to him first, I need you to bring it up, and then ask for my opinion after you bring it up. I will not express my opinion. Ono looked puzzled. He didn't understand, if it was necessary to formulate a rule that everyone had to abide by, why didn't it be someone with appeal and deterrence like Qin Xia and Angron who proposed it? Even Qin Xia, who made this suggestion to him, said that he would not express his opinion when he asked for his opinion. He's not stupid, he's just too kind. Kleist patted the old bear on the back. As scary as the old bear Ono looks, he's actually very kind at heart. Ono looked at Crest and gave him the same puzzled look. In order to make Ono understand, Kleist asked Qin Xia knowingly, there will definitely be people who explicitly refuse to abide by the principle of not killing proposed by Ono, so what will be the fate of those who refuse? Those who refuse to abide by the principle of not killing will be killed. Qin Xia said lightly, remember those who oppose, and then find a way to kill them during regular or large-scale gladiatorial fights. Qin Xia replied. Yes. Kleist held out his fist. Qin Xia and Kleist bumped fists. And Ono was particularly horrified, if the no-kill principle is to protect people, then why kill those who are unwilling to abide by the no-kill principle? It is to protect people, yes, but only to protect those who deserve to be protected. Qin Xia responded calmly, for a pure beast like the Skinner, even if he pretends to obey the principle of not killing, we have to find a way to kill him. Of course, Crest has already killed him, well done. I will show no mercy to those who deserve to die, brother. Crest smiled and pointed to his heart, meaning I understand you, and then bumped fists with Qin Xia again. She was apparently very happy to accept this proposal on the principle of not killing. If we single out and kill those who don't follow the rules, then what's the difference between us and the Skinners and the Nasa twins? We are all executioners. Ono still didn't want to accept it. Qin Xia looked at Ono. His eyes did not turn cold because of Ono's resistance, but were a respectful and kind look. You are a kind person. Qin Xia spoke slowly. He had already remembered why the name Enemimus sounded familiar to him. Enemimus, the kindest gladiator in the arena. When Angron thought that all the spectators were vicious people, Enemimus said to Angron, watching us die can make them feel alive. If all went well, Enemimus would be killed by Angron after he was nailed. Your soul shines. Qin Xia's eyes were covered with a layer of white light. You were born in Nuseria, it is the glory of this cesspool of Nuseria. Anyone who is lucky enough to meet you is lucky enough because they will be taken care of by you directly or indirectly. But the spiritual light in Qin Xia's eyes disappeared. We can achieve nothing by being good and just. Hearing this, Ono lowered his head, feeling annoyed. I don't want to kill anyone. Qin Xia said, if I can, I want to save everyone, even those who don't deserve to be saved by me, but I'm not a god. If I have to choose, I will choose the people I care about and abandon the people I don't care about. A wizard mentor once told me that people come and go, things have priorities, and relationships have closeness and distance, so this choice is not shameful. Listening to what Qin Xia said, Ono raised his head, took a deep breath, and asked softly, can't we separate those who are unwilling to abide by the principle of not killing, isolate them, and be vigilant to them? They are gladiators, the oppressed, they are not nobles. We need to do more than just protect ourselves in the arena, Qin Xia explained, we also need to escape. The slave owners will even encourage us to try to escape, but those who just want to stay in the arena will take the initiative to do bad things. The no-kill principle is just a test. It just tests who can cooperate and who can't cooperate. Both in the fight and in the future when we get out of this mess. After listening to what Qin Xia said, Ono lowered his head again. He was not stupid. He knew that Qin Xia explained so much to him because Qin Xia cared about him. Like Angron, Crest. Otherwise, Qin Xia would not say anything. At most, he would kill this old guy named Anonymous as an uncooperative person. It is too easy for a wizard to kill someone secretly. Am I a cruel and cold-blooded person in your eyes? So you are unwilling to accept it? Qin Xia suddenly asked. No, but you're certainly not as kind as I am. Ono said this in a gentle tone and with a gentle look. Qin Xia could read some information from this expression. Ono understood everything, but he was so kind and gentle that this moral quality became a hurdle that his rationality could not overcome. Ono went on to say, I have lived to this point and have rationally accepted that kindness and a sense of justice alone can do nothing. You are not as kind as I am, but you are far more rational and intelligent than me, and you are far better at doing the right thing than me. I believe that if I, Anonymous, were replaced by you, I would never be in the arena now, depressed about my past mistakes. Reason tells me that you can save more people even if you kill people. Hearing this, Qin Xia became more certain that Ono understood, but it was difficult for him to overcome the hurdle in his heart on his own without anyone to persuade him. In this conversation in the dream today, Qin Xia didn't necessarily want Ono to do anything, he just wanted Ono to understand some truths. Today you helped me confirm a problem that has been bothering me for a long time. Ono said, thank you. Qin Xia nodded gently, I just have to explain to you, Angron and Crest, that you don't have to tell the gladiators about the no-killing principle. It's the same if Yakila does it. I will tell you. Ono replied calmly. Qin Xia was silent, and left Ono's dream, preparing to go to Angron's dream, concentrating on the past. Angron's brain is not so easy to get into. His psychic resistance is stronger than that of a certain brother who is ranked 13th among the primarches, likes blue and single combat, and has a little sense of humor. Chapter 33, The Good Man's Past. Enemimus was pinned to the ground. No one was holding down this young, strong, and terrifying bear, but the gravity restraints applied to it were like a bear catcher's iron trap, preventing it from moving. There was a corpse in front of Ono. None of the bodies belonged to the nobles or their lackeys, all of them were the bodies of the rebels and the civilians who chose to follow them. The High Knight's lackeys were shooting people in rows. At the sound of a gunshot, dozens of people in a row fell to the ground in an orderly manner. Traitor! Traitor! Anonymous struggled hard, staring at a ragged beggar with his blood-red eyes. Around the beggars there were some people in rags and some wearing simple leather armor. They were all part of the rebel army. Ono was furious and racked his brains to understand why these people who had fought alongside him were now standing on the side of the enemy. Do not. Perhaps they had already sided with the enemy. Enemimus would figure this out after a while. Kill all the rebels, and destroy all those who supported the rebels and did not turn to the light, as well as all the cities. But leave Anonymous alone. A cold command came from the sky. A woman with white wings on her back fell from the sky. That was a high rider. Every thread on the woman's body was enough to buy hundreds of slaves' gorgeous clothes, and the jewels on her crown were enough to buy a country, which declared her identity. Traitor, traitor. Anonymous kept repeating the word, and then his roar turned into crying. SHH, SHH, SHH. The female High Knight came to Ono, squatted down and hugged his head, and comforted him softly. You were just hit by an oxygen-sucking bullet, and your organs are seriously lacking oxygen. Wait a minute before shouting. Traitor, running dog. Ono continued to curse, his saliva and tears splashing onto the gauntlet of the tall knight who wiped the blood off his face. Ono used his head to hit the High Knight's chest, but the attempt only caused him to be unconscious for 2 minutes because the High Knight had a thin layer of energy plating on his body. How can I comfort you? The High Knight still hugged Ono. I gave you a chance, Anonymous. I said that if you agreed to come back to me, I would turn your people and subordinates into your slaves and playthings, and let them play the game of uprising with you. Just like our relationship before. The last sentence poured into Ono's ears like a raging flame, instantly igniting all the confusion, dissatisfaction, and hatred in his heart. Ono wanted to curse. The High Knight knew that he was about to curse, but those dirty words were obviously inappropriate in such a public occasion with other nobles present, so the High Knight covered Ono's mouth. She covered it gently, using the silent force field integrated into the glove to prevent Ono's words from penetrating her palm. This is not your fault. You are too naive and too kind. The tall knight consoled him softly. Of course you can't see that there are people with ulterior motives in your team. Even if you did, you would still want to influence them. Ono raised his head and glared at the High Knight. His eyes were so fierce that the High Knight's guards subconsciously took a step back. You made too many mistakes in this uprising game. Why can't you understand that those who share the same fate as you don't necessarily stand with you? As he spoke, the tall knight turned around to look at the traitors behind him, sizing them up one by one. You are not so naive as to think that not being enslaved is more important than everyone having enough food and clothing from now on, right? After saying this, the tall knight set his sights on Ono again. Her tone was gentle, but it sounded terrifying to Ono. Come back and stop playing this uprising game. When you were 3 years old, you followed me to fight everywhere. You know my abilities and the abilities of other gods on Nuseria. Don't make me hurt you again. Get out of here. Ono gritted his teeth, and angrily said, I would rather go to the arena than be your slave. The tall knight was stunned for a moment, but his astonishment was soon replaced by a smile that said everything is under control. You'd rather go to the arena than come back to me and be a slave. She says. It seems I still have to give you some small punishment, just like when we were little. Do you remember that your parents and sister died because of your fault? Now soon more people will die because of your fault. She pulled out a metal tube that looked no bigger than a toothpick and had an idea. The gravity that came from the sky instantly crushed the traitors who were scolded and rebuked by Ono. Ono was still struggling and cursing in his heart, but he seemed to be lying on the ground and turning over. The severe pain made him twitch so much that he couldn't even utter a clear word. Tears flowed down his face like a spring, and his whole body twitched. He felt as if someone was stabbing his heart with a knife. Those traitors were hateful, but Ono still couldn't be completely heartless to them because they had fought alongside him, nor could he applaud their deaths. Not to mention, these people were killed by the tall knight in front of him, which reminded Ono of the most painful and tormenting past events. It's not my fault, the tall knight said with a smile. I was going to let them live like livestock, but you forced me to kill them. This is your fault. Ono lay on the ground, holding his heart, convulsing in pain, lacking oxygen, and coughing and wheezing violently. Slowly he closed his eyes, and when he opened them again he saw the cave and the other gladiators. What's wrong with you? Angron asked. Qinxia also opened his eyes and looked at Ono. Nothing. Ono shook his head, it was just a dream. You had a dream. Angron raised his eyebrows and helped Ono up from the ground. A dream of being killed? I felt a piercing pain from you. I only feel this way when there are dead people around me. Nothing. Ono smiled, it's really nothing, just a nightmare. Angron nodded and sat back down. Qinxia also closed his eyes and continued his exploration of spiritual power. Honor glanced out the window, then at the gladiators, and saw that everyone was awake and day had arrived. So the old bear wanted to ask Qinxia about what they discussed in the dream yesterday, but this time Angron nodded to him. Qinxia has already talked to Angron. It was easy enough to make Angron understand the necessity of cruelty. Angron felt the pain of every death, but he felt the pain of those he cared about even more. During the days in the arena, Angron felt that Qinxia, Ono, and some other people cared about him and took care of him. If the death of an ordinary person would make him feel a sudden and piercing pain in an instant, then the death of Qinxia and the people who cared about him was equivalent to the pain of tearing open his heart, prying open his bones and pulling out his tendons. So Angron would make a choice, and that choice was to keep everyone he cared about alive. Ahem. Ono stood up, cleared his throat, and said to everyone, "I've been thinking about it all night and have an idea. Can you guys listen to it?" Hearing this, most people had no reaction. Kleist already knew what was going to happen. Yukula is resting due to a broken arm. Qinxia also knew what would happen. And Angron had subconsciously sensed everyone's emotions at this moment. Chapter 34 Swordsman. We can't kill each other anymore. After attracting the attention of most people, Ono spoke hesitantly. If we don't have to kill each other in a regular fight, then we shouldn't kill each other. What happened with Yukula shouldn't happen again. Having said that, Ono looked at Yukula, who was huddled in the corner, with concern. Yukula had no reaction. He was immersed in pain. The only thing he cared about now was when he could see his mother again. Again? Someone asked. You made this suggestion last time. I thought you would behave yourself after you humiliated yourself. That's right, the Colosseum doesn't say we have to kill each other in regular fights, and they tend to save our lives for large-scale fights or festival celebrations, but they don't forbid us to kill each other either. What qualifications do you have to forbid it? Someone else said. I'm not forbidding you, I'm calling on you. Ono said to the two gladiators who clearly refuted him, please. Crest looked coldly at the two people who were being begged by Ono. She knew clearly that Ono was not really begging the two men to accept the principle of not killing, but was begging them to be smart and save their lives. Shut up, old man. I won't agree to any bullshit idea of not killing each other. In large-scale gladiatorial fights, we are comrades and fight side by side, that's true, but in regular gladiatorial fights, we are enemies. The two still resisted firmly. Angron looked at Qinxia. Qinxia sat cross-legged, closed his eyes, and said nothing. But in another third perspective created by psychic power, Qinxia observed everyone's reactions at the same time. Some people obviously disagreed, but they were calmer, or rather, they had more time in their non-combat lives, which made them quite sophisticated. They could see that there was a reason why Ono was repeating this suggestion that had been rejected before, so they would be more cautious. Some people don't care about this suggestion at all. Others pretended to care, because they were better at observation and they noticed something in the young primarch's undisguised eyes. But it's okay. The no-kill principle is only the first step. I always agree with the old bear. A loner who had been sitting in a corner all day spoke up. I don't want to be involved in any of your escape plans, including Caesar and others. I didn't participate when they tried to escape. As he spoke, the misfit glanced at everyone and tried to persuade Ono, I don't consider anyone as a friend either, but I don't want to kill anyone if you ask me to, and I don't want to be killed by anyone either. We should really consider old bear's advice. Does not abiding by the principle of not killing mean killing people? Someone asked. I think so, said the misfit. If you don't want to be killed and don't want to kill anyone, why don't you agree with the no-killing principle proposed by the old bear? The questioner was speechless for a moment. Qinxia looked at this loner and felt that he was at least a normal person. This person may not participate in anything the gladiators do, but at least he will agree to something that is good for everyone because he doesn't want to die. Why don't you accept it? Ono was a little angry, and also felt fear for those who didn't accept it. Do we have to kill each other when we don't have to? Seeing that those people were still indifferent, Ono turned to look at Qinxia. He used his eyes to convey to Qinxia a message, that is, he really hoped that Qinxia could persuade him. Seeing Ono's look as if asking for Qinxia's opinion, the gladiators looked at the man who had carved a triumphal rope for each of them after killing the untouchable slaughterer last time. Qinxia said nothing and didn't even open his eyes. I object, too. Someone else made his position clear. I'm sorry. If I could achieve better results in the arena and become more famous, I could get out of this hell sooner. Ono frowned, you're going to leave by stepping on the corpses of people who are suffering from the same disease. Either I get killed by someone, or I kill someone else and step on their dead bodies to get out," the man responded. Ono was helpless. Finally, after a brief silence, the old bear turned around and looked at everyone present. "Raise your right hand if you agree." After his eyes fell on Yukila, Ono changed his words, "Raise your hands if you disagree." Those who opposed Ono didn't even bother to raise their hands to show their disapproval. Qinxia wrote down the 10 people who clearly opposed it, and then looked at the schedule on the wall. He was to take part in his first regular fight this afternoon, and neither he nor his opponent would include any of those 10 men. Qinxia was not in a hurry at all. He glanced at the schedule and saw that at least Angron and Crest would get their turn to team up with the 10 people. After a while, the heavy footsteps of the security robot penetrated the gate and entered the cave. Qinxia stood up and walked towards the gate. The fight is about to begin. Like before, the security robots will escort the gladiators to the armory to get their weapons, and then go to the arena to fight. But today, after the gates were opened, the security robots stopped on both sides of the road, as if lining up to welcome the arrival of an important person. Then the man in gorgeous clothes strode across the road in the middle of the intelligent machine team and came into the cave. Ahem! The man cleared his throat, raised his head, and glanced at every gladiator with contempt, finally fixing his eyes on Qinxia. "The person in front of you is the person in charge of the arena, the honorable servant of the Tark family. Kneel down and salute." The intelligent machines all made a cold electronic synthesized voice. Qinxia looked down at the person in charge, "The honorable servant of the Tark family? I thought you would be so grand." The person in charge held his head high and looked at Qinxia without any fear. In his eyes, all the gladiators were just puppets controlled by him. There seemed to be more important things, so the person in charge did not bother with etiquette and was too lazy to get entangled with these uncultured gladiators. "Your schedule has been changed. You have to fight a guard today." The person in charge said. "The honorary title of this guard is swordsman." Qinxia frowned. "Oh, you haven't heard of this title? It doesn't matter, but you will know how much this person wants to kill you." The person in charge smiled and said, "Let me remind you. The slave hunting team that you blew up in the desert that day. Your parents are in the slave hunting team, so you are looking for a swordsman to help you get revenge." Qinxia said. "Don't interrupt." The person in charge had a look on his face that said, "You're dead, the swordsman is my nephew. Okay, dig a bigger hole, and hold the funerals of your brother and his son together tomorrow to save trouble." Qinxia walked past the person in charge. "I saved you trouble, so you owe me a favor." The person in charge was obviously not good at bickering, so he was choked by Qinxia's words and took a deep breath. Then he looked at Qinxia's back and announced coldly, "An important person came to watch your fight. He said he can let you make a request." Qinxia didn't want to pay attention, but then he thought of something and stopped and turned around. "I want to take 10 people with me." Bringing 10 people, this request is too outrageous. The 10 people Qinxia wants to bring onto the field are the 10 people who are unwilling to abide by the principle of not killing. But it seemed that the person in charge had a reason to agree, so he nodded and said, "You can pick any of the 10 people except Angron. They will all die anyway." Qinxia turned around and searched among the gladiators. The person in charge lowered his head without even looking at Qinxia, and scratched his ear with his little finger. "You didn't even say thank you. It seems that your gladiator friends have never told you that no matter who you are, you have to please the master here, your master. I want to kill you in pieces. All I need to do is pick up a pen and schedule a round-robin fight for you on the gladiatorial schedule. Do you understand?" The person in charge flicked the earwax out from between his fingernails. "Forget it. I'm not a fussy person. Let's get ready. I'll go greet my master first. A slave like you can be rude, but a superior like me can't." Chapter 35. The maggot eye circled in the arena and began to announce the show. In the VIP room in the audience seats, Tark sat by the fence, sipping wine, playing with gems, and gazing intently at the fighting area of the arena. As the gate of the arena slowly opened, the door of the room was also opened by the guards, and the person in charge of the arena walked in trembling. "What did he ask for?" Turk asked. "He said he would bring 10 people on stage." The person in charge tried his best to sound calm. The patriarch of the Tark family was very confused after hearing this. "The swordsman's guards combat team only has 6 people, why did he bring 10 people to the battlefield?" Perhaps he doesn't know the number of people he will face. The person in charge responded quickly, after all, I informed him at short notice, following your orders. So he wants 10 people. Tark turned his head and stared at the person in charge with a fierce and cold expression, and you agreed? Let a slave gladiator make demands on a slave of the Tark family like you. The person in charge wanted to apologize at first, but then he reacted immediately and replied calmly, because your order was for me to agree to one condition, so I agreed to it. Even if he wants me to die, I will die. The expression on Turk's face instantly turned into a smile, that's why I let you manage the arena. The person in charge forced a proud smile and said, it is my greatest honor to be favored by God. Don't be nervous. Turk noticed that the person in charge was trembling, come sit next to me, let's taste wine and watch the fight together. Yes, master. The person in charge immediately walked over to Tark and sat down. The cushion pressed by his dirty pants from the Colosseum cave was expensive enough to feed a city of people for a month. It was something only a high knight could sit on. But the person in charge didn't dare not sit down because he knew Turk's temper too well. Tark didn't care about cleanliness or respect, he only cared about obedience, and if a slave was favored by his erratic mercy and asked to crawl out of the filthy mud pit and sleep in one of his bedrooms, the slave had better do it, rather than refuse on the grounds that he would get something dirty. Why do you think I'm so concerned about a gladiator? Tark asked suddenly after tasting the wine in his mouth. Do not know. If any other high knight gave such an honest answer, he would be punished for being stupid, but for Tark, dishonesty would make him angry. Because I'm observing him. Turk said, a sane wizard who is not crazy, he is useful in his own right, so I want him to help me do something. If you want him to do something, I will convey your wishes immediately. The fighting in the arena will be stopped today, and everyone in the audience will go back home. The person in charge said, of course, my nephew who wants revenge must also go back home. Turk was even happier, drinking with a smile, and even poured a glass for the person in charge himself. The gladiators have arrived on the field. The swordsman from the royal guards and his team also came onto the field. The two sides started a confrontation. At this moment, Tark suddenly turned to look at the person in charge and asked softly, did you obey my orders last carnival day and let your wife and daughter go to the cave? Of course. They looked very happy when they came back. The person in charge responded with a smile. Turk also laughed, actually, I was just saying that in anger at that time. You really didn't have to. Forget it, since they have all been there, why should I say all this? Anyway, I regretted it afterwards. I'm sorry. Please forgive me for being so foolish as to follow your angry words, but your orders are everything. The person in charge responded. After hearing this, Tark looked at the person in charge. After a moment, he looked away, took a sip of wine, and looked towards the arena. I have prepared an apology gift for you, a manor in an artificial oasis. Qin Xia looked at the people in front of him. Including the guards holding two swords who looked like swordsmen, all the guards wore gorgeous golden armor, and their arms were wrapped in a silver object. Qin Xia knew that the guards were the human troops of the High Knights. Each of them was a noble, but their status was not as high as that of the High Knights. One characteristic of the guards is that they use something called silver vine. It's what the guards wrapped around their arms. The so-called silver vine is a versatile tool. It can be the armor, sword, vehicle, and even a bed or bridge of the guards. This damn thing can change into anything, it is truly omnipotent. Every guard has one of these universal tools. Qin Xia turned around and looked at the 10 people he brought with him. They are all gladiators who are against the principle of not killing. We have to work together. The gladiator who loudly refuted Ono in the cave looked at everyone, just like we did when we fought against the Slayers 2 days ago. The gladiators exchanged glances with each other and finally their eyes fell on Qin Xia. Qin Xia responded with a look that made the gladiators feel cold. At this moment he did not seem to be joking or laughing as he did when he was not meditating. He looked grim, like a different person. Hey, slave! The swordsman facing Qin Xia suddenly spoke, with an obvious smile in his voice, it seems that you have been trying to curry favor with my uncle, otherwise how could he allow you to bring 10 people to face me and my comrades? How did you curry favor with him? It was like being his male servant. You are wrong about this. Qin Xia raised a finger and explained seriously, I am not trying to curry favor with your uncle. Your uncle owes me a favor so that you and your father can be buried together. These people behind me are repaying me for the favor. The smile beneath the swordsman's helmet instantly disappeared. "Fuck you. Are these 4 words your last words?" Qin Xia said with a smile. "After your funeral, when you and your father's widow come to the cave on Carnival Day, I will tell them your last words, and then put your photo on the wall so that you can feel a sense of participation." Hiss, wait. Qin Xia ignored the swordsman's shocked and murderous expression and asked with a worried look on his face. "If you die, will the women in your family be sold directly or buried with you? If it's the latter, then I'll take back what I just said and change it to, I'll dig up your grave in the future and carve your last words on the skulls of all your family members. I'm going to chop you into pieces and feed you to the dogs." The swordsman immediately roared and attacked. The maggot eye kept hosting the fight, and when the host was about to announce the start, the silver vine in the swordsman's hand had already shot towards Qin Xia. Qin Xia dodged sideways, and the gladiator behind him had his head wrapped by silver vines, and then the silver vines tightened like a stream of water. The sound of a head exploding was heard. One of the gladiators fell to his knees. When another guard's silver vine flew towards him, Qin Xia dodged again, and the gladiator in the silver vine's flight path had his body pierced through. As the silver vines flowed out of the gladiator's 7 orifices like water, other guards also took action. Qin Xia dodged the attack again and suddenly raised his right arm. "Stop." When the guards saw him raise his hand, they thought he was going to release his spiritual power. When they heard the word "stop," they all stopped and prepared to use their defensive witchcraft equipment to resist the attack. So it really looked like these guards had been stopped from fighting by Qin Xia. Qin Xia looked worried. "Your parents didn't have a child when they were old, did they? Otherwise, I would have to consider keeping a distance from your mother on Carnival Day. But she won't be left out, because there are also older strong men among the gladiators." The swordsman was stunned for half a second, then pounced on Qin Xia like a madman. Chapter 36. Punching and Kicking. Swordsman. It is not without reason that this combat specialty is used to refer to a guard soldier. The moment the swordsman approached him, Qin Xia suddenly had a passive prediction. The swordsman rushed in front of him and swung 6 swords at an extremely fast speed in less than a second. First he cut the Achilles tendon, then the wrist, and each joint was stabbed with a sword. This is obviously not the combat speed and accuracy that a normal human should have, and in the prophecy scene, Qin Xia analyzed that the swordsman must have used an implant. Those implants would allow the swordsman to move with incredible speed and accuracy, and even analyze information about the weaknesses of the opponent he was fighting. Just like the swordsman's father, the captain of the slave hunting team, he clearly didn't react, but was able to passively raise his hand and shoot a tranquilizer dart at Qin Xia. The prophecy ended and the swordsman came to the front. Qin Xia, who already knew the opponent's movements, grabbed the swordsman's throat. This move instantly disintegrated the swordsman's offensive, making every action of the swordsman in the prophecy impossible to achieve. After lifting the swordsman up by the throat, Qin Xia reached out and tore off the swordsman's right arm, then threw the man 10 meters away. The audience's cheers reached their highest point at this moment. The moment the swordsman landed and stirred up dust, Qin Xia had already rushed in front of him. He put his right arm around the swordsman's neck with both hands, and then exerted force. The swordsman was strangled to death by his own arms. The silver vine flew towards Qin Xia, but was easily dodged. The swordsman's companions had witnessed this man's death. They reacted and were extremely surprised. The swordsman will be killed by witchcraft, and the way he dies will be different depending on the witchcraft used by the wizard Qin Xia. The guards who came with him had thought of this, but they never expected that a famous warrior in the army would die from the physical attack of a wizard, who didn't even take any weapons into the battlefield. "Don't worry, I don't know how to use witchcraft." Qin Xia grabbed a finger on the swordsman's right arm and swung the entire arm like a windmill. "People like you should be brutally executed. Witchcraft without any warning will make your death too easy." The guards immediately distanced themselves from the surviving gladiators and prepared to deal with Qin Xia with all their strength. But at some point, a strong wind suddenly blew up in the arena, blowing up red sand all over the sky. Qin Xia's entire figure was obscured by the overwhelming dust. The observer integrated into the guard's armor couldn't even see Qin Xia's figure. Qin Xia used his spiritual power to shield himself instead of being shielded by the red sand by chance. "Come out and help us!" A gladiator shouted towards where Qin Xia disappeared. Just when Qin Xia grabbed the swordsman's throat, tore off his arm, and then strangled the swordsman with his arm, the gladiators were fighting with several other guards, and now only 4 people were dead. Naturally, these 4 people were targeted by the guards who had lost their top priority target. Silver vines gushed out of a person's 7 orifices. A person's body was pierced by a spear transformed from silver vine. Another person was wrapped in silver vines and crushed alive. The last person was stabbed through the neck by a sword from the guards. The 10 gladiators who chose not to follow the no-killing rule died. Those who failed to pass even the simplest screening would lie on the red sand forever, and would no longer have the slightest chance of killing the gladiators that Qinxia cared about and thought could at least cooperate. When the guards gathered together and were alert to their surroundings, a strong wind blew, dispersing the red sand in the sky, and Qinxia's figure was exposed in front of them. The swordsman's right arm was still in Qinxia's hand, and was still being swung like a windmill. Together. Qinxia raised his head. The guards immediately released the silver vines. Qinxia dodged through the silver vines and came in front of one of the guards in one breath. He smashed the other's head with the swordsman's armored right arm. Qinxia squatted down to avoid the silver vine sweeping from behind his neck, and turned around the instant the body fell to the ground and used his swordsman's right arm to pierce the chest of another guard. Flying armor fragments flew in all directions. The force Qinxia applied to the swordsman's arm that pierced his chest pulled him backwards. At this moment, Qinxia felt a cool breeze blowing from behind him. He turned around and raised his hand to block the coming knife with his palm. The guard who wielded the sword was stunned at first, and then saw a piece of breastplate fragment between Qinxia's palm and the blade. This was the last thing he saw before he died, because Qinxia's hand pierced his head. After Qinxia's punches and kicks, the only person left alive on the field besides him was a guard soldier. Someone hired me to encourage the swordsman to seek revenge. The guard raised his hands, otherwise I really don't want to come. When Qinxia was puzzled by this sentence, the silver vine of the guards turned into a shield, and he ran out of the arena at a rapid speed. Qinxia watched the other persons fleeing back indifferently, and simply threw the broken arm in his hand, which could no longer be used as a weapon, to the ground. After the survivors had run for nearly 1,000 meters, Qinxia finally walked to a stone on the ground. The tall body took 2 steps back, then quickly ran up and kicked the stone. The stone drew a perfect arc in the air, eventually piercing through the guard's helmet and embedding into his skull. This stone is really hard. Qinxia muttered, no wonder Angron can kill people with the stone of Nukria. Even the maggot eye, which was approaching quickly, did not hear what Qinxia muttered. The wild cheers from the audience drowned out all other sounds except the cheers. Qinxia turned his body and looked around the entire audience seats in the Colosseum, and finally his eyes fell on the corpse of a guard nearby. When he was young, the White Scars had a company commander, and the company commander was called Khan in the regiment. Seeing that Qinxia was too thin, the company commander decided to teach him some hand-to-hand combat martial arts. His martial arts weren't that strong, but with a body implanted with the Grey Knight's gene seeds and various superhuman organs, it was too easy for him to kill an opponent of the guard's level with his bare hands. You may be wealthy and high-ranking, and you may have trained hard and fought for the High Knights for decades. But I can still kill you easily, not to mention that I'm less than 16 years old and it's only been less than a week since I was reborn after the transformation surgery. Give the Nuserian a little Astartes shock. These 2 sentences emerged in Qinxia's mind. No. How old should my soul be? Qinxia began to think seriously about this sudden question. He remembered that after traveling to the Warhammer universe, he found that his body had reversed back to the state of 9 years old, so counting all the years before coming to this universe and traveling to the present for the second time, probably less than 40. After coming up with the answer, Qinxia turned around, and amid the cheers of the audience and the questions from Maggot Eye about his feelings after the war, he made a very obvious gesture of covering his ears. Although this cannot block out the cheers. The audience just watched as Qinxia refused to listen to their cheers and turned to walk towards the gate leading to the cave. When passing the corner of the energy stand that separated Qinxia from the audience, Qinxia saw a ragged woman and a boy standing beside her legs. The woman's face showed the pain of spending all her savings to buy the tickets, but also a smile of fulfilling her son's birthday wish. And the child cheered. Qinxia hesitated for a moment. He saw admiration in the child's eyes, not a cruel look of appreciation for killing. The child's mother immediately squatted down, grabbed the child's hand, and waved to Qinxia with a smile. Qinxia smiled, nodded, and left the battle area. Chapter 37. God? Miscellaneous soldiers. I'm back. Qinxia strode into the cave. He was stunned when he found that the gladiators were gathered together waiting for him. What's wrong? Qinxia felt that the atmosphere was a little subtle and serious. Man. Crest walked forward slowly and stared at Qin Xia's eyes calmly. Qin Xia frowned and looked at Crest, not understanding what was going on. Kleist's expression suddenly changed from calm to ecstatic. You killed a team of guards. You killed a team. A whole team. The gladiators cheered. Ono also cast an admiring look at Qin Xia from behind the crowd. Angron didn't know why everyone was so happy about the guards being killed, but because everyone was happy he was happy too, and it looked like he was grinning. You defeated all the guards with just 3 punches and 2 kicks, and that bastard called the swordsman, you tore off his arm and strangled him to death. Well done. Before I came and saw this, I thought that the messengers of God would not shed blood. God's messengers will bleed. Ono killed a guard when he was young. I didn't kill a single guard. That guy got stuck in the quicksand and I killed him. Listening to the gladiators' praises and exclamations, Angron finally understood why the gladiators were so excited and amazed by the deaths of those guards. Because in their opinion it is impossible to kill a warrior of that level with bare hands. Those bastards are not God's messengers, and the High Knights are not God either. Qin Xia spoke to everyone with a smile, gesturing with his hands. When that bastard who claims to be a swordsman rushed over, I instantly realized where I should hit him. I grabbed his fate by the throat. Did you see that? I tore off his right arm with a snap and threw him out. I rushed to the bastard at full speed. I didn't want to strangle him at that time, I wanted to kick him to death. Qin Xia said as he took 2 steps back to distance himself from the crowd, then quickly jumped up and kicked out with both feet together. That's it. A flying kick. But then I thought it would be too easy for him if I kicked him to death. His damn father knocked me out. How dare he come to seek revenge? Qin Xia performed an ultra-flying kick and quickly stood up from the ground. He said to everyone, if it were you, you could also kill those running dogs of the High Knight. Originally, all the gladiators were very excited, but when Qin Xia heard the last sentence, everyone except Angron and Ono fell silent, and the atmosphere suddenly became cold. You have a strong body, Kleist said. You can avoid the silver vines and tear off the guards' hands, but we can't. You really can't dodge. Qin Xia nodded with a smile, but I said you can kill the guards because the guards and the High Knights are human beings just like you. They just rely on their good equipment. Kleist. If I gave you a power spear, or something fierce. Qin Xia said to Crest. Your fighting skills will kill a guard like killing a dog. Just shoot the guard and make him spit blood and twitch all over. Upon hearing this, Crest did not agree with these words, but just forced a smile. Qin Xia understood that most people here were afraid of the guards and the High Knights. The god of Nuseria was not a title made up by the High Knights themselves because they were sultry and confident. They were just like Ono said, they could do what only gods could do. But these people need to understand why the High Knights and guards are like gods, and how to prevent them from exerting their so-called divine power. This will take time, and now is not the time for a long speech. Guys, it's time for the triumphal rope. Qin Xia sat on the ground, revealing his broad back. One person, help me record this victory of unilaterally slaughtering the guards. Qin Xia looked very happy and cheerful. Ono looked at Qin Xia, recalling how ferocious and cruel Qin Xia had been in the arena. The old bear thought about it and felt that Qin Xia might have a clear boundary that divided people into friends, neutrals, and enemies. Coldness and cruelty are contradictory to the current joy and friendliness, but people are so complex and contradictory. Kleist smiled and stepped forward to poke a small blood spot on Qin Xia's back, and spoke in a deliberately hoarse voice, so you are now the guard slayer. Strong man. Of course, Madam Quasi-Guard Slaughterer. Qin Xia responded with a smile, I am still the fucking guard's widowmaker. The widowmaker of the guards. The widowmaker. Angron was stunned for a moment, then showed a look of surprise. What a good name. If I can get a good weapon in the future, I will name it after it. Night. Yakula huddled in a corner, sweating all over and his face pale from the pain of his broken arm. He had already wrapped the magic bandage that he had distributed earlier around the broken part, but it only made the broken part heal quickly. The pain was still there, but he couldn't tell where it came from. When the pain made the young gladiator, who was the same age as Qin Xia, become dazed, he would recall the scene of his arm being cut off and dismembered by the skinner. Every time he thought of this, he would feel more pain. When his consciousness was blurred, Yakula vaguely saw a person coming in front of him. The man then squatted down and injected something into his arm, and the pain subsided. I only picked this up from the armor of the guards in the arena. Qin Xia sat next to Yukila and crushed the empty potion tube. This may be what they use to quickly relieve pain when they are injured. Do you think it works? Yukila did not respond. He wanted to respond, but he was too weak from the pain and sudden relief he was now experiencing to speak. After Qin Xia had been sitting with Yukila for half an hour, Yukila finally came to his senses and apologized for his silence. I'm sorry. It's okay. I understand. Qin Xia patted Yukila's back. This will probably relieve the pain for a few days. Give me some more time. I will find a way to make you no longer in pain, or even completely recover. Yukila looked at Qin Xia, his facial muscles trembling, and he forced a smile with great effort. Qin Xia looked at Yukila. He recalled that after Yukila was injured, he watched Crest and Ono go up to bandage Yukila. He felt that it was ineffective to not provide material help when it was needed and only give verbal comfort, so he began to think about how to use psychic power to restore broken limbs. It hasn't been researched yet, but at least I can use a tube of potion picked up from the guards to help Yukila. You are very kind to me. Yukila said. Why? Qin Xia was stunned by the question. After a brief silence, Qin Xia lowered his head and pondered for a few seconds, then slowly spoke, because your mother cares about you very much. I don't even know your mother's name, nor do I know her, but I just care about people like you, and I envy you. Have a good rest, tough guy. Qin Xia stood up, went back to the corner and sat cross-legged, closing his eyes. I will try to make sure your mother sees her son is whole and healthy before she comes next time. Chapter 38. 3. Tearly next morning. The sound of the gate opening in the cave startled all the gladiators. The gladiators either sat up or stood up and looked out of the gate. A large number of security robots blocked the roads leading to the outside world. The grand display of using security robots to support the scene indicated to everyone that the master of the arena had arrived. The person in charge still strode into the cave with a cold expression. He walked straight past all the gladiators and came in front of Qin Xia, shouting with his head raised. You think you are particularly powerful? In this place that belongs to me. Your power is not as effective as the pen in my hand. If I want, I can write a few words and you will die. Hearing these shouts, Qin Xia looked down at the person in charge and listened expressionlessly until the guy had finished shouting all the words he wanted to shout. There were some insults among them. It was not until the person in charge was exhausted from shouting that Qin Xia slowly spoke. So, you are here for your brother and nephew's matter? You said you could kill me with a pen, but you are here barking like a dog. You even took an entire night to trouble me about your dead nephew. Oh, by the way, you took my favor yesterday and held the funerals of the father and son together. It took a whole night, but it only took one night, a pit. You're welcome, I always like to help others. Qin Xia's words were like adding fuel to the fire. The person in charge became furious and continued to shout and curse. Angron glared at the man in charge, clenching his fists. Crest pulled Angron in, shaking his head slightly at him. Ono did not stop anyone at this time. Now he was the one who was irrational and calm. After grabbing a stone on the ground, he slowly approached behind the person in charge. Shut up! While the person in charge was still chattering and barking, Qin Xia shouted loudly. Frost condensed on the walls, and the person in charge wanted to shut up from the bottom of his soul, so he stopped talking. Why did you come straight over here to threaten me? What are you thinking? Qin Xia looked confused. Do you think your threats and your so-called killing pen will work? I don't know where I rank among all the gladiators in the arena, but I know I must be very popular after I killed the guards and those bastards from the Talco family. The Colosseum is yours? No, of course not. You are just a dog tied to the Colosseum to guard the gate. The only difference between you and the trapped beasts like us is that you have a master. If I were you, I wouldn't come here and humiliate myself. As Qin Xia spoke, he analyzed the motives and psychological character of the person in charge. From the very beginning, the person in charge gave him the impression of being incredibly stupid. Of course, this guy didn't act so stupidly at first, but Qin Xia knew he was a fool at first glance. 90% of the reason why he was able to become the person in charge of the arena was because he was talented in both civil and military affairs, and intelligent. Qin Xia could even profile the personality of the responsible master. He must be an arrogant control freak who doesn't care whether the people under him are qualified to hold an important position. He only cares whether they are completely loyal to him and carry out his orders and will 100%. You are very popular, but that's just to prevent me from dragging you out and beating you to death with a simple order. I can still kill you, but it'll be more popular and more entertaining for the Nuserians. The person in charge gritted his teeth. Besides, I didn't come here specifically to pick a fight with you. You don't have the qualifications or level to do so. Then you just came here to get scolded. Qin Xia smiled. I don't mind insulting you in 100 ways that involve personal insults, but if it makes you feel good, forget it. The person in charge was silent for a while, and after a long time, he couldn't come up with a strong counterattack, so he turned around and left. The nobleman I mentioned before who allowed you to make any request is here again, and he wants to have lunch with you. Having dinner with your control freak master? Forget it. If having this meal allows me to skin you alive, I'd be happy to do it. Qin Xia said. Of course you can refuse. The person in charge stopped and turned back with a sly smile. Lord Tark is not a petty person, especially when it comes to real slaves. Qin Xia frowned. The door is open until noon. You can make your own decision. The person in charge turned around again and left. When the guard dog left, Angron stepped forward and said, You should never have lunch with a noble. I have a bad feeling about this. I agree. Kleist agreed, and he opened the gate. Maybe this is our chance to escape, or at least we can gather some information. After saying that, Crest looked at Ono, wanting to ask for his opinion. Ono stood there holding the stone, not knowing what he was thinking and saying nothing. I have a question. Suddenly a gladiator asked, We are not locked in the cave forever. We know how to get outside from here. What other information do we need to collect? We know how to get there? Yes, we know how to get to the arena, to that damn place isolated by the damn energy shield. Crest roared, Idiot! This is not the way we need to know. But no one has ever tried to get out of the energy shield. Maybe there is some mechanism buried under the red sand. Then try it next time you are in a fight. When others cut you, you can slowly search for it on the vast red sand. Qin Xia observed the gladiators while Crest was arguing with others. Many of these gladiators stared at the opened gate. The heavy gate that Caesar once needed psychic power to penetrate was now open to everyone. Angron was also staring at the gate, clearly wondering whether to rush out. Most of the people here have been locked up for too long, and their desire to escape outweighs everything else. This gate is not made of any extraordinary material. Qin Xia said, If I lick it as food, my corrosive saliva can dissolve a hole in it. Everyone listened to Qin Xia's words and thought he was joking, but looking at his expression, he was not joking. Even if I grab the person in charge and read his memory while he's here, I'll know how to get there. But this gate and this arena are not our only obstacles. If everyone doesn't want to die, then we have to think long term. Qin Xia continued. We have to consider where to find better weapons after we get out of this gate, instead of the usual harpoons and other crap we are given. We have to consider what kind of stronger enemy we will fight with better weapons, where we will settle down after escaping the arena, and even how to face the encirclement and suppression of the slave owners. We even have to consider how we can get rid of the slave owners forever, such as killing them with an uprising. I miss every breath of hot, scorching air outside, and my heart tells me I want to rush out right now. Qin Xia slowly glanced at each person. But the Colosseum isn't really the only hell we have to face. I hate to say it, but this hell right now is relatively mild. Chapter 39, The Strange Tall Knight. Qin Xia was walking on the road that was leaving the cave but not leading to the battle area. After speaking to the gladiators, Qin Xia decided to meet with the patriarch of the Naderk family, although this was not his main purpose. Since you are a wizard, I won't blind you. It's useless anyway. The person in charge walks in front. Qin Xia observed everything nearby and remembered everything, including the roads he had walked and the things that existed on these roads. Every few steps there was an automatic machine gun hanging above his head. Qin Xia estimated the caliber by eye and it was about 19 mm. Although he didn't know what kind of ammunition the Nuserians used for the automatic machine guns, no matter what ammunition they used, weapons of this caliber were extremely powerful. It penetrated the ordinary gate in the cave as easily as a knife through tofu. However, automatic machine guns are just the most common thing here. From the gaps, hidden grooves, spray holes, and various traces on the walls of this metal corridor, Qin Xia's experience in his previous life could help him analyze that there must be a large number of mechanisms in this corridor, including but not limited to solvents, flames, and laser nets. Soon, Qin Xia came to another intersection. Standing in the middle of the intersection, Qin Xia could see some signboards. Security Armory. Inspection Post. VIP Lounge Area. That's the exit. The person in charge pointed to the end of the road in front of him. If you have the ability to run out from here, you will have achieved half of your goal of leaving the arena. Qin Xia looked in the direction the person in charge pointed and saw the checkpoint at the exit. Some employees were undergoing inspections before entering their workstations inside the arena. However, at the end of the road, outside the sentry post, stood a steel statue. It looked like a large mechanical body, lying motionless on a steel platform. Very abrupt. Stop talking nonsense. I know you don't have such kind intentions. You just want me to die. Qin Xia retracted his gaze. The person in charge showed dissatisfaction of being discovered on his face. He glared at Qin Xia and took him to another path leading to the rest area. When they arrived outside a room whose facade was so luxurious that it looked out of place compared to the entire environment, the person in charge signaled Qin Xia that she could go in. Be careful and don't talk nonsense. The person in charge reminded in a low voice, otherwise I'm afraid that your vicious mouth will kill everyone in our arena. Don't worry, I don't think your control freak master is that crazy. Qin Xia responded. The person in charge didn't say anything else and quickly opened the door. After Qin Xia went in, the person in charge closed the door and left. The moment he entered the room, Qin Xia was shocked by the magnificence and insane luxury here. He remembered that when he was growing up in the White Scars, he went with the regiment to a world that produced crystal for defense. The governor's mansion in that world is as magnificent as this lounge. Qin Xia looked towards the dining table. Next to the dining table filled with food that Qin Xia couldn't recognize, a middle-aged man in gorgeous clothes was placing the tableware. He seemed to have obsessive-compulsive disorder, and personally placed each piece of tableware in what he thought was the most correct position. He also seemed to be distrustful of his servants, who stood by and watched awkwardly as their master did what he was supposed to do. Oh, you're here. Feeling the gazes behind him, Tark put down the last piece of tableware that needed to be straightened and turned to look at Qin Xia. He had a warm smile on his face, his eyes were also warm, and there was even some admiration and approval. But Qin Xia did not analyze this person's psychology and personality, because he knew that everything about this kind of person on the surface was false. Please sit down. Tarkra pulled open a chair at the edge of the rectangular dining table. After Qin Xia sat down, he sat on another chair opposite. Qin Xia didn't even have the mood to move his knife and fork. He had already done what he wanted to do most after agreeing to have lunch together, which was to collect information that could be used in escaping from the arena in the future. But it wasn't entirely because of other intentions. Another reason was that Qin Xia had some reservations about Tark's identity, and he didn't think that any friendliness shown by this guy was real. Do you know? Turk held a knife and fork and ate voraciously, while his waiter kept cutting and taking food from the table for him. These personal slaves knew what their master liked. The butcher you killed and the man whose neck you twisted into a knot with witchcraft are all my nephews, and they are all members of the Talco family. As he said this, Turk was still eating voraciously with a smile on his face. Qin Xia's heart instantly tightened, and he secretly prepared to use his spiritual power to twist the family patriarch's neck into a knot. He didn't want to do this, because if he chose to take action, he would die, so he was not prepared to kill Tark at this dinner. But since the other party mentioned the hatred of blood relatives, then I have to thank you for this. Tark swallowed a mouthful of food, raised his glass with a smile. Those little bastards are young but quite capable. Their father, my 31st brother, is a warrior, and he trained those little bastards since they were young. I never thought you could kill them all. I don't mean to be disrespectful, man. It's definitely not a slight. Tark smiled and tilted his head, then raised his hand to signal Qin Xia not to misunderstand him. It was only then that I saw how much potential you had, and I became convinced that I had made the right decision to keep your wizard a secret from my family's slave hunting team. After praising him, Tark looked at the slave beside him and said, Thank you, Niyujin. The slave raised his hand and picked up a piece of stewed beef tendon and put it on Tark's plate. Why do you suddenly want to eat beef tendon today? We all have sudden ideas, don't we? Tark smiled at the slave and started eating beef tendon. Qin Xia had a blank expression on his face. He neither moved his knife and fork nor spoke a word. He stared at Tark's every move. He didn't expect that it was the patriarch of the most powerful family in Nikolaya who helped him hide the fact that he was a wizard. Hiding the fact that a gladiator was a wizard, and then letting this gladiator kill his brother's son. Qin Xia felt that Tark was crazy. If he was crazy himself, he would realize that there really was a madman who helped him hide this matter. "Aren't you curious why I want you to kill my nephews?" Tark asked with a smile. "I'm not curious." Qin Xia replied, "For people like you, family affection is even more useless than a footcloth. You don't know what love and trust are. You only have suspicion and murder, even towards your blood relatives." "No, that's not the reason," Turk said. "People of your status have always been prejudiced against us nobles, but I'm really not the kind of person you said." "Guess another way." Qin Xia was silent for a moment, then spoke again, "I don't know." Tark took a sip of wine, smiled for a second, and then his expression suddenly turned ferocious and fierce. He pounded the table and howled as if he was having a manic attack, "Because I fucking hate all the nobles on Nikolaya. Everything." Chapter 40. Trading. "Because I hate them, I want them to die." Turk's expression became more and more severe, and his voice became more and more frantic. Qin Xia looked at Tark calmly without saying a word. "It is precisely because I hate them that I get very excited when I see my brother suffering because his sons were killed and hating me because he is dissatisfied with my order not to allow revenge. Then I commanded him to marry a slave, both for himself and his sons' wives, because of the hateful look of my brother." At this point, Turk suddenly burst into laughter and clapped his hands on the table. The slaves around him laughed too. Qin Xia still had no expression on his face, he just thought this guy was a lunatic. "Sorry, I lost my composure." Turk suddenly froze, then smiled and waved his hands, returning to his normal dining state. Qin Xia had no appetite at all. After thinking for a while, he asked tentatively, "What is the sculpture on the way to the arena?" "Sculpture?" Turk raised his eyebrows. "That's not a sculpture. That's a combat robot." "How much stronger is it than the security intelligent machine?" Qin Xia asked again. "It's so powerful that the security omnics are at a disadvantage in front of it." Tark said bluntly, "But there are very few of these ghost things, so you don't have to worry about encountering it." Qin Xia frowned slightly, not knowing whether what Tark said was an unguarded honesty or a half-truth. Tark continued, "I want you to do something for me. Help me destroy a family. If you agree and do it, you won't have to worry about running into that ghost thing in that small noble family." "If I agree? Does that mean I can refuse?" Qin Xia asked. "Of course, I don't hate you. You don't have to worry about dying if you refuse, but I believe you won't refuse." Tark raised a finger. "Make me a condition." "Any condition is fine, including setting you free and giving you citizenship." "Make it happen now." "Then it's okay, but my condition is to set all the gladiators free and give them citizenship," Qin Xia said. "I don't like gladiatorial combat, but people need it." Tark shook his head slightly. "The nobles have 10,000 alternative entertainment options, but the only entertainment for slaves and untouchables is watching gladiatorial combat on TV in the garbage dump. So I can't cancel gladiatorial combat, let alone let go of all the people who participated in it." Qin Xia said without hesitation, "Forget it. I have changed my request to, I need a drug that can regenerate severed limbs, and all gladiators will no longer have fasting days from today. In addition, they can get drug supplies every week. These are 3 requests, although they are very small." Turk shook his head at first, but suddenly nodded, "I will promise you one first, you choose one and let me fulfill it now, and then I will fulfill the remaining 2 after you have done what I asked you to do." Qin Xia nodded, "Send someone to the cave to deliver medicine that can regenerate severed limbs." "You want to regenerate the limb of that kid with a broken arm?" Tark instantly guessed Qin Xia's intention. "I think it's better to give him a prosthetic body. It's better than the original one and definitely not inferior." After thinking about it, Qin Xia nodded again. "Yakula needs an arm, but he also needs to become stronger, and a prosthetic arm is a good choice. Your requests are all for your gladiator friends." Turk was a little confused, "Why don't you ask for something for yourself?" Qin Xia did not respond immediately. He was thinking that Tark would never give him what he wanted, so he had to fight for it himself. No matter who the noble who was to be killed was or where he was, Qin Xia believed that the noble had what he wanted, and as long as he left the arena, he would get what he wanted. "I only want one thing," Qin Xia said. "The survival of my gladiator friends, a guaranteed survival." Turk raised his head, closed his eyes and thought for a while, then finally raised his glass with a smile, happy cooperation. Late at night. In an oasis above the red sand of Nikolaya, Qin Xia stood in the forest and looked at the luxurious manor in front of him. The maggot eye fell from the sky, but this maggot eye was a little different from the maggot eye in the Nikolaya Colosseum. It was also a sphere, but larger. After the maggot eye arrived, it immediately teleported some equipment to Qin Xia. Qin Xia squatted down to check and found that the small package contained a sci-fi looking sword, an energy pistol without a magazine, and some explosives. Sorry, sir, I can't provide more support because this is a secret operation. Although you may have seen that this operation is not so secret, I still have to obey orders. The voice of the operator came from the maggot eye, but the master of the Tark family said that he doesn't want you to die in this cooperation, so if you feel powerless and trapped, please fire the flares in the backpack. Qin Xia said nothing, did not take any weapon, just put on his backpack and walked towards the manor. After you send out the signal flare, a flying vehicle will come to the manor to pick you up. However, in this case, the operation cannot be disguised as a wizard prisoner in the manor going crazy and out of control, killing everyone. If you kill them normally and fire a flare after you come out, the tribe leader's guards will come to pick you up in a flying vehicle. The maggot eye followed Qin Xia, chattering incessantly. Qin Xia stopped not far away. The maggot eye also stopped shortly afterwards. Qin Xia turned around and hooked his finger at the maggot eye. The operator of the military maggot eye immediately controlled the drone forward and approached Qin Xia's mouth. Get lost. Qin Xia said. Okay. The military maggot eye immediately became invisible and took off into the air. Qin Xia turned around and looked at the manor, then continued walking forward. When he took a step forward, everything in front of his eyes suddenly went dark, and then his field of vision was filled with a picture that kept getting closer and farther away. How many guards are there in the manor and what is the manor's defense deployment? There were other people in the manor, such as slaves. It was night, and the slaves were locked up in the dungeon under the farm behind the largest building in the manor as usual, and the guards took over all the chores in the manor. Qin Xia knew all of this. Qin Xia found that his ability to predict had become even stronger. With a very satisfied feeling, Qin Xia continued to move forward. At the entrance of the manor, 10 armed guards were standing guard. Each of them saw a hunchbacked old man walking towards the manor. Qin Xia used his psychic power to affect the vision of the people in front of him. Qin Xia continued to move forward, picking up stones on the ground as he walked. You? The first guard questioned, then blurted out the last syllable as his head was smashed by a rock. Qin Xia continued to walk forward, throwing stones casually as he walked, killing all 10 guards one after another. It's not that he didn't want to use the weapons in the packages, but those weapons were not tailor-made for his Astartes body. His little finger couldn't even fit into the ring-mounted activation structure of the pistol. As for the sword, from the mortal's standard it was just a dagger, and Qin Xia felt that he might as well not use it. The moment the first guard was killed, the alarm directly connected to the heart sounded, and the shrill alarm echoed in the manor. All the nearby guards came over, some holding shields and daggers, and some holding energy rifles. The former immediately formed a shield formation, while the latter lined up like line infantry, ready to concentrate fire. Qin Xia could see that the military proficiency of the Nuserian people was really poor. In the eyes of the guards, Qin Xia was just an old man, so the leader asked directly, "Who hired you, old man? Do you know who you want to kill?" "I don't care." Qin Xia slowly moved his body, with his left hand pointing to the sky and his right hand to the ground, and took a step forward. No matter which slave owner died, no matter who killed him, as long as he died, it's a good thing. I will have one less enemy in the future. The shock wave spreads. Everything within a radius of 60 meters was shattered. Chapter 41. Invasion. Inside the huge and magnificent building of the manor, the team guarding the entrance was forming a human wall ready to shoot anyone who showed up. Qin Xia walked out from behind them and released psychic lightning in front of their astonished gazes, instantly killing all of them. Many guards stationed in a room and arranging defenses after hearing the alarm were about to rush out of the room when they were suddenly blown to pieces by grenades thrown from the shattered ceiling. On the route guarded by the elite guards, these people were asking loudly about the invaders, and then the questions stopped abruptly and their heads exploded at the same time. An invasion of the estate is underway. All the signs of this invasion made people think that a whole team of professional killers had entered the manor, but in fact, there was only one person who was responsible for all this. "Tell me where your master is." Qin Xia stretched out his hand to the guard in front of him, but he did not really ask. Instead, he used his psychic power to read the other's mind. Instill the specific thing you want to find into that person's brain, and then Qinxia can read the related memories. Just like learning the Nuserian language when reading Ono's brain. But the guard had never met the person he was supposed to protect, and his rank was too low. Many guards in the manor have never seen their master. But they are people in the manor after all, and Qinxia can still read some clues from their minds and use them to infer the location of the person he wants to kill. Underground. Qinxia lowered his head and looked at the ground beneath his feet. At this time, uncontrolled psychic prophecy suddenly appeared. Qinxia raised his head and suddenly heard the sound of something being pierced through his ear. Then he subconsciously dodged, and the place where he was originally standing was pierced by a beam of light. Looking through the gap through which the light beam penetrated, a few hundred meters away in this huge building, 10 people wearing the same eyepieces as the captain of the slave hunting team were holding energy pistols, their eyes penetrating the wall to see where he was. Then the beams kept coming. Those people were separated from Qinxia by hundreds of meters and countless walls, but they could see where Qinxia was and shoot at his location. These people advanced while shooting, and the energy plating on their armor directly melted the wall, allowing them to move straight towards Qinxia. As Qinxia was forced back further and further by the light beam, other guards who were being mobilized in the manor were able to arrive in time, and eventually they tried to capture Qinxia alive. All of this is what Qinxia saw in the psychic prophecy. He already knew the other party's decisions and tactics, so it was impossible for him to just sit there and wait to die or be forced to retreat. Qinxia chose to take the initiative. In the prophecy just now, Qinxia saw a large caliber heavy machine gun that was constantly spraying flames. That heavy machine gun would block his route together with the light beam, so Qinxia went straight to the location of the heavy machine gun. Dense beams of light continued to come, and there were so many that Qinxia could only dodge. If he had been wearing grey night gear when he first came to Nuseria, the fight wouldn't have been as troublesome as it is now, even without the help of psychic prophecy. The predicted heavy machine gun was heading towards Qinxia's location. It was mounted on a 4-legged combat machine. This thing was only the size of a small car, not too large, and could run freely in the tall and vast corridors of the manor building. The guard standing on the 4-legged combat machine and operating the heavy machine gun was wearing eyepieces to patrol the surroundings. Whether it was a wall or other obstacles, in his eyes, they were just transparent substances made of red lines. If someone approached, he would see that person. "He's coming to me." The guard saw a vague human figure rushing towards him. The guy ran straight towards him while crashing through all the walls along the way. The guard, who was influenced by psychic power and thought Qinxia was an old man, was very curious. What kind of person could have the ability to crash through walls continuously without any equipment? The question flashed in his mind as the guard put both hands on the heavy machine gun and fired at the oncoming human silhouette. The 19mm caliber heavy machine gun sprayed out a 2-meter-long tongue of fire and fired hundreds of bullets in less than 2 seconds. These bullets easily penetrated the steel interlayer in each wall and shot towards Qinxia. The guard held the trigger tightly, and the heavy machine gun quickly overheated, but a nearly melted piece of metal ejected from the gun body. After the second piece of metal was automatically loaded like a bullet, the overheating problem was solved without even a break. The guard kept shooting until Qinxia rushed in front of him, and then he discovered that there was a barrier flashing white light in front of the invader, blocking all the bullets. Seeing this scene means the guard's life has come to an end. Qinxia instantly jumped onto the 4-legged machine, picked up a bullet from the heavy machine gun ammunition shells scattered on the ground, and stabbed it into the guard's head. At this time, those people who could emit light beams hundreds of meters away were a little far away from Qinxia. They could still see Qinxia, but the light beams could no longer completely penetrate the wall between them. "Finally, I have a suitable weapon." Qinxia grabbed the armrest of the heavy machine gun and violently disassembled the entire weapon. Qinxia quickly checked the magazine and saw that there were still 15 rounds of ammunition in it. The ammunition boxes on the 4-legged machine were mostly filled with heavy machine gun ammunition, but Qinxia did not pick it up for use because he needed to return quickly to fight. Moreover, he felt that these 15 rounds of ammunition were more than enough. After jumping up from the 4-legged machine and landing, Qinxia took a deep breath and rushed towards the enemies who were constantly firing light beams. The distance between the two sides quickly narrowed, and then as a beam of light passed by Qinxia, he fired at the hole made by the beam. The bullets from the heavy machine gun passed through the hole made by the light beam, tearing the entire upper body of the person who fired the beam off from the lower body. Another beam of light came, but was blocked by the psychic barrier. Qin Xia quickly turned around and repeated the same trick, shooting at the hole. There was a bang from the heavy machine gun, and the dust in the whole room was blown up by the impact of the bullets fired from the gun, but Qin Xia stood still like an ordinary person using a small caliber rifle, quietly watching another person on the other side of the hole having half of his body torn off by a large caliber bullet fired from the heavy machine gun. After killing 3 more people in the same way, the enemy obviously realized that randomly firing light beams would no longer work as before, so they temporarily stopped firing and thought about countermeasures. Qin Xia carried a heavy machine gun and sprinted 100 meters in a straight line. When he encountered a wall, he would put his shoulders in front of him, then jump up and push hard, crashing through the wall, and repeating the cycle. Until Qin Xia came to a corpse. He squatted down, picked up the eyepiece and put it in front of his eyes, and found that this ghost thing could indeed see through walls and see people and objects, but its principle was to scan the heat energy within a large circular area, and then use a chip to process the wearer's vision, and use 3-dimensional technology to present the scanned heat energy on the lens for intuitive display. Just like the perspective in FPS games. Therefore, a living person appears as a blur in this eyepiece. Chapter 42, One-Sided Killing. Interesting. Qin Xia put away the eyepiece and threw it into his backpack, then calmed down and thought about countermeasures. After taking half a second to think of a countermeasure, Qin Xia took out a smoke bomb from his backpack and forced himself to calm down. He had to develop a temporary way to use his psychic powers. After taking a minute to make sure that he could use his psychic power as he wanted, he dodged and quickly approached the enemy's location. The athletic ability of the Astartes is extremely amazing. Qin Xia was just like the White Scars Astartes he had seen as a child. He could quickly overcome obstacles in the complex battlefield environment like an acrobat, and easily and extremely quickly crossed every obstacle between himself and the enemy. He could tell how thick or thin a wall was, and then choose to break through it, or climb out through the window. In short, he would avoid passages and main entrances that might have a large number of defense devices. Finally, the 6 people who gathered together, wearing power armor and holding beam cannons, searching for the enemy through eyepieces heard the noise and looked in the direction of the sound. I saw a man with a heavy machine gun on his back suddenly crashing through the wall, and raising his hand holding a round object amid countless fragments and debris that were flying around. Moreover, this person was covered in frost all over his body. In the eyepiece, he looked just like the surrounding debris and did not release any heat. Open! The person who subconsciously wanted to shout the order to open fire was hit in the brain by the round object thrown by Qin Xia, and then the round object exploded in the head of this unlucky guy, and countless fragments burst around, turning other people into sieves. Qin Xia, who was intact, stood among the corpses on the ground. He waved his hand gently, and the psychic barrier in front of him dissipated. Qin Xia heard a sound similar to that of someone with damaged respiratory system, breathing hard. He looked in the direction of the sound and found a survivor on the ground. It's hard to tell whether this man is lucky or unlucky. He lay on the ground, covering his neck which was bleeding profusely, breathing in but not out. After the medical system inside the power armor injected him with a shot of medicine, the man gradually recovered his breath and asked weakly, Who are you? Someone who will make all of you live in fear all day long. Qin Xia responded, the butcher. Qin Xia no longer used his psychic powers to interfere with anyone's vision, so the survivors on the ground could recognize that he was the wizard who became famous in the arena. Qin Xia took the heavy machine gun from behind and smashed it hard on the survivor's head. After killing another person, Qin Xia opened the magazine of the heavy machine gun and found that there were still 10 rounds of ammunition left. The ammunition for this heavy machine gun is thicker and longer than Qin Xia's fingers. Qin Xia opened one and examined it. The ammunition contains a concentrated liquid gunpowder. The specific principle is unknown, but Qin Xia discovered through a quick ignition test that this thing has extremely strong explosiveness and the warhead is fragile. It was clearly an anti-personnel fragmentation munition. This information was not very useful, but Qin Xia still tested it and wrote it down because it would help him identify the military equipment on Nuseria. After quickly collecting information, Qin Xia quickly picked up every usable and portable item from the corpse. Pistols, explosives, beam cannons, perspective eyepiece. Even the chips inside the power armor and various equipment parts that Qin Xia thought would be used in the future. Finally, Qin Xia pulled out the rope from the lining of the power armor, tied together the things he had collected and could take back, put them on his back, and continued to move forward. After walking forward for a while, Qin Xia suddenly stopped. His psychic prophecy appeared again. After quickly browsing the prophecy, Qin Xia turned his gaze to the place that the prophecy revealed to him. Then there was a ripple on the empty wall, and a completely transparent cloth-like object fell to the ground, revealing the person hiding behind it. You are not in the arena now. Qin Xia looked at the exposed fugitive in astonishment. That person was the person in charge of the arena. Why am I in the arena? The person in charge asked. This is the manor that Chief Tark gave me as a reward. What did you do wrong to make that madman ask me to kill you with a lot of conditions? Qin Xia's face seemed to be full of doubts. That madman asked me to kill your whole family with 3 conditions. The person in charge was quite alert in the life and death situation. The guy frowned, thought for a moment, and answered, my master certainly didn't send you to kill me. There is another Tark in this manor, who is my master's brother. Qin Xia frowned and thought for a few seconds, then looked up at the person in charge with a helpless and gloating look. I just removed my psychic disguise. If you see me, you will still die. The person in charge suffocated for a moment. But I'm not here just for the matter of that lunatic Chief Tark, and I don't care about that lunatic at all. You can still live a little longer. Qin Xia looked around. By the way, do you have a library or something? Hearing that although Qin Xia misunderstood the order of Chief Tark, he did not seem to take the order seriously, he gradually felt relieved as he believed that Qin Xia was definitely the person in charge of serving Chief Tark from the beginning to the end. At least they didn't take action immediately. Even if this slave who was secretly loyal to Chief Tark misunderstood the order, they could still talk about it. Yes. The person in charge nodded. Please. Qin Xia made a gesture of invitation. The person in charge leads the way. Qin Xia followed behind. So you secretly serve Chief Tark? The person in charge said as they walked over. No wonder he hid the fact that you were a wizard so that the Slayer gladiator team could fight you without any preparation. Why do you think I am loyal to that lunatic? Qin Xia asked in confusion. He's not a madman, he's just a good man who has been hurt too much, the person in charge replied. You don't know his past at all, so you think he's a cruel and cold tyrant, but he's not. In order to explain Tark to Qin Xia, the person in charge kept talking and defending the best master in his mind. When he was young, he was the 67th child in the family of the previous Tark patriarch, and he was not the focus of attention. The reason why he became the clan leader was indeed because he was cunning. No, because he was smart and daring, but he didn't want to hurt anyone. He's actually very kind and very empathetic. Qin Xia, who had been patiently listening to what the person in charge said, kept rolling his eyes. The person in charge couldn't see Qin Xia's expression, so he continued talking. If Qin Xia stared at and analyzed the expression and look of the Lord of the Arena, he would understand that this not-so-bright man was speaking from his heart. He was a nobleman, but he never abused his slaves. He even had a love affair with a female slave. Can you believe it? Slaves are livestock. They are just male and female, but my master treats them as human beings. Just to remind you, the slaves I'm talking about are not servants like me. I'm from a minor noble family, so I'm qualified to be a slave. The status of slaves is much lower than mine. Qin Xia suddenly recalled Chief Tark's attitude towards his personal slaves during the meal. Not cruel, talking and laughing, even saying thank you. But Qin Xia also felt that this was just another piece of solid evidence that the psychopath had mental problems. Maybe there is something good about Turk. But a madman. But it's damn scary whether you're an enemy or a friend of this lunatic. Don't talk nonsense. Qin Xia kicked the person in charge. No matter what kind of person this Tark is, I will kill the whole family of you, a slave of so-called minor noble origin, and when it is Tark's turn in the future, I will kill them all without mercy. Chapter 43. Moral Torture. Don't tell me if you have any complaints about the master you are loyal to. If you tell me these, you will definitely be worried that I will report you to the master. Will you still be able to spare my life later? I said I don't owe any allegiance to the nobles. I came here partly because I had a deal to make with your master, and partly because I had something I wanted to do. So you're a butcher too. At this point in the question and answer, the person in charge stopped and turned around. Staring into Qin Xia's eyes, the not-so-bright middle-aged man's gaze made Qin Xia read moral torture from it. So you are also a butcher? The person in charge continued, it's just that you don't slaughter untouchables, but nobles. But you are still a butcher, an executioner, and a murderer. You just don't slaughter untouchables. But in terms of methods and morality, what is the difference between you and those untouchable butchers you killed? Hearing this, Qin Xia looked at the person in charge's bright eyes that revealed a sense of moral questioning. His movements and expressions clearly showed that Qin Xia was in deep thought. The person in charge still stared at Qin Xia with his sparkling eyes. He obviously thought that slaughtering the nobles was wrong and immoral. As a man who was promoted by a control-freak lunatic because of his obedience, he obviously did not have the cleverness to use torture to delay time or find an opportunity to escape. Yes. Qin Xia made an expression of sudden enlightenment. If I were to slaughter nobles, wouldn't I be no different from those slaughterers? Ahoy! The person in charge nodded. Qin Xia lowered his head, his expression gradually becoming painful, and he was obviously in torment and struggle in his mind. The person in charge looked at Qin Xia with his head down, still using his eyes to morally interrogate Qin Xia. But then, the person in charge noticed that Qin Xia suddenly raised his head slightly, and glanced at him with eyes that lasted for 1,000 years. I'll go to you. Qin Xia jumped up, put his feet together, and kicked the person in charge into the library door 10 meters away. The person in charge rolled on the ground for more than 10 meters before he stopped. The belt given by Tark that he wore for escape injected him with medicine, which quickly repaired his body. I never burn myself out, and I never torture myself morally. Qin Xia walked past the person in charge with his head held high, his tone firm and arrogant. But don't think I have no morals. On the contrary, I think my moral standards are a beacon in this cesspool of a world and universe. So I have a sense of confidence. Everything I do is just. They are the embodiment of the noble moral principles of the spiritual level in the material universe. The waves and consequences caused by my actions, all the people and things I have changed, they are the embodiment of the abstract spiritual concepts of morality and justice in the material universe. The person in charge got up and dared not say anything else. Shut up and stand there waiting. You have to fulfill and do whatever I ask of you. Qin Xia picked up a book and started reading. Chief Tark definitely didn't send you here to kill me. The person in charge still emphasized, he asked you to kill his brother who came to see me today. Qin Xia was annoyed by the nagging. He frowned and stared at the page and replied impatiently, I didn't come here specifically to be a killer, so I don't bother to figure out who to kill. Today you and that madman's brother will die together. The person in charge was silent. Qin Xia walked to the bookshelf, and scanned the bookshelf with sharp and eager eyes, reading the titles of books. Finally, his eyes fixed on a book placed in the most conspicuous position. He immediately reached out to take it out and quickly browsed through it in front of the person in charge. In the eyes of the person in charge, Qin Xia read the book page by page at an astonishing speed, but his expression showed that he was serious, and it did not seem like he was trying to pretend that this immoral aristocratic butcher was educated. Both of them were silent for a while. The person in charge suddenly remembered something and asked, What about my master's brother? What if he really sent you to kill his brother? Wouldn't you mess up the job? I know where he is, I know what he is doing, and I have 100 ways to make him come to me instead of me wasting time looking for him. Qin Xia was still looking at the book. The person in charge lowered his head helplessly, then raised his eyebrows, and was shocked to find a layer of frost on the surface of his shoes. After a while, Aaron Tark walked out of the suddenly opened door of the underground protective facility. The fierce gunfire and shouting had stopped. No one knew where the invader was, but he had definitely killed all the hundreds of guards in the manor. The best choice for Alan now, the best choice that his mind can think of is to run away. This is indeed the right choice. If Qin Xia were here, he would also think that Alan's choice is completely correct. However, when Aaron was escaping, he saw the corpses all over the ground and the extremely tragic battle situation. He couldn't help but feel more and more timid, and even began to wonder whether he should return to the underground facility. But after hesitating for a long time, Aaron finally forced himself to wade through the corpses. He ignored any forks in the road and walked straight ahead, his will telling him that was the right thing to do. Slowly and quietly, the noble passed by the library and saw the lights inside. Aaron looked around quietly and first saw the person in charge of the arena. If the person in charge had not invited him to his home, he would not be behind bars tonight. In front of the person in charge who was standing with his head down, under the huge bookshelf filled with books, a tall and sturdy figure nearly 3 meters tall and dressed in cool clothes stood there, holding a book in his hand. Come in, I was planning to catch you in the underground facility, but now you're here on your own. Just as Alan was about to leave quietly, he heard the words from the tall figure, and then he realized with shock that he had been discovered. Aaron, who didn't think he could compete with the other party, walked into the library obediently. The pale-faced person in charge turned his head and looked at Alan. Alan gave him a frightened look in return and then stood with the person in charge. You know, although I am a soldier, I really like reading and learning knowledge. The tall figure turned around, his eyes fixed on the book in his hands. Aaron recognized him instantly. He was the executioner who had killed all his sons in the arena. Aaron, whose father and mother both have the surname Tark, has a poor memory, so the fact that he was able to recognize Qinxia so quickly was due to Qinxia's psychic power. By devoting half of his concentration to sensing and locking onto talk, he could simply influence his thinking. Although it was not enough to turn a person into a puppet, Qinxia firmly believed that with a little development and time, this way of using psychic power would definitely be of great use. It must be him that my master wants you to kill. The head of the arena reiterated. He asked me to invite Alan to the manor tonight. This is your manor, not mine. Aaron suppressed his fear and defended himself. Although Alan is a general, but compared to the butcher in front of him who had left the magnificent manor littered with corpses and a river of blood, 99.9% of the enemies Aaron had dealt with in his life seemed weak and powerless. Aaron didn't have the courage to face real warriors instead of the untouchables who brought disaster upon themselves because of a disapproving look. Which one of you is the noble he is talking about? Qinxia faced Alan and the person in charge, but his eyes were not on these two people. He held the book in his right hand, staring at the page, and after waiting for a while to answer, he turned a page. This is his estate. Aaron reiterated. It's my manor, for sure. The person in charge was as pale as a corpse, but he still managed to speak in a normal tone, but you can tell with your toes that Lord Tark definitely didn't want to kill me. Lord Alan came to visit today, and then Lord Tark sent you here. It's easy to guess the reason, right? I was sent by your master. Qinxia's eyes fell on the person in charge. The person in charge spread his hands, as if asking, isn't it? Qinxia looked down at the person in charge calmly. 2 seconds later, the person in charge's head exploded, and there was nothing on his neck. Qinxia, looking down at him, could see his black metal spine exposed in the air. Aaron was about to shout out something like what the hell when his head exploded. Qinxia glanced at the corpse on the ground, then turned expressionlessly to read other books. He originally wanted to spare the life of the person in charge, but only until he left, because the person in charge was the owner of the manor and he must be very familiar with this place. But Qinxia decided that it would be better to kill them and have peace of mind. Chapter 44. The real purpose. You probably have a lot of good stuff on you. Qinxia squatted down and searched the bodies of Aaron and the person in charge, looking for anything on them that could be used or saved for future use. When his hand touched Aaron's body, Qinxia found that his hand was blocked by a thin layer of energy coating. He gently stroked the energy plating, a layer of psychic energy attached to his eyes, and used psychic vision to observe the flow of energy. Finally, he found a device tied to his waist at the source of the energy flow. This device looks like a belt, emitting a slight buzzing sound that only Qinxia can hear. When Qinxia reached out to remove the belt, he suddenly had an idea and stopped moving. He stood up, picked up the heavy machine gun he had been carrying on his back, put a bullet into the chamber, and then fired at Aaron's body. With a loud bang, a large amount of fragments were bounced back onto the psychic barrier erected by Qinxia, while Aaron's body was unharmed. Qinxia observed the energy coating and found that although it could perfectly resist damage, its energy density was not as good as before, which meant that it could also be consumed. But a large caliber heavy machine gun can only consume a little energy. It was just such a weird thing. Qinxia thought about it and felt that if he had not used his psychic power, it would be wishful thinking to kill this noble instantly. But think about it the other way around. No matter how good the things used by this Taco family noble named Alan are, or how awesome the black technology on him is, when he was shot in the head by psychic energy, he was no different from a person who was not wearing energy-releasing plating. He couldn't even withstand it for half a second. It's a good thing. It's mine now. Qinxia put his hand on the belt, not knowing how to stop it from releasing energy. He closed his eyes and used his psychic power to explore the internal structure of the belt. After Qinxia roughly understood some of the functions of the belt's internal structure, he had an idea to use his spiritual power to penetrate the outer shell made of unknown technology to stop the belt from releasing energy. Finally, he picked up this high-tech creation and threw it into the backpack behind him. Qin Xia searched through Aaron's body again and found that this guy might have come in a hurry and did not bring many things with him. There was nothing on him except some jewelry. As a member of the noblest family in Nuseria, any piece of Alan's jewelry is priceless, but these jewelry are of no use to Qin Xia for the time being, and the remaining capacity in the backpack has to be reserved for more important things. It's your turn. Qin Xia walked to the body of the person in charge and squatted down to search. The person in charge did not have equipment such as a belt that could release energy plating, or it was possible that he had it but did not take it out. Qin Xia didn't have much time to search the entire manor, so he just collected what he found. 2 bottles of potions and a self-defense pistol that uses energy as ammunition. After putting the things away, Qin Xia stared at the body of the person in charge and found that this guy was simply a cybernetic human. Looking into the body from the gap in the neck, both the organs and bones are made of metal. Damn, why is the biotechnology in this damn place of Nukria so outrageous? Qin Xia kicked the corpse away and walked towards the bookshelf. The library in this manor had so many books that Qin Xia was amazed and reluctant to leave. Judging from the appearance of the person in charge, the owner of the manor, he doesn't seem to be a book lover. I guess he just put the books here to show off to outsiders. But even so, the books given to the person in charge to show off are hundreds of times more than all the books Qin Xia had seen in his life before his physical body traveled to this universe, and after traveling to this universe and then traveling again. It is impossible to stay here and absorb all the knowledge here, so I can only pick up a few books that may be useful. So Qin Xia started to scan the books. Books on science and technology are given top priority. Qin Xia's backpack was not big and could not hold much. Qin Xia didn't consider whether he could understand the science and technology books he had set his sights on. Indeed, his life experience as a scientist was in the 21st century AD, when the level of technology was still very basic and certainly not as advanced as that of any human territory today. But Qin Xia's first time traveling, that is, after arriving in 40K, he did not do nothing in the White Scars and on the planet where he was first after traveling through time. He also learned something. Qin Xia believed that with his intelligence and talent for research, there was nothing he could not learn or understand. After collecting more than a dozen books, Qin Xia began to consider whether to throw away the heavy machine gun on his body to make room for memorizing books. However, at this moment, he found a desk in front of him with something similar to a tablet on it. That thing is like a data pad commonly used among humans. The uncontrolled psychic prophecy appears again. In the prophecy, Qin Xia saw himself studying the data tablet for a while, and then discovered that there was a function in it that could browse the digital version of any book in this library. Depend on. Qin Xia threw away all the books on his body, picked up the data tablet and put it in his backpack, then left the library and went somewhere else. Killing the person in charge in Alan was not the main goal of this trip. Searching for some books and obtaining some information about Nuseria's science and technology is one of the goals, but it is still not the main goal. Qin Xia left the library and came to the warehouse of the manor. In this place where there were many miscellaneous items, Qin Xia cleared out a metal table and placed something he had brought on the table. It was a small thing that looked like a cubic box and was no bigger than a finger. But this thing is the processor in the brain of the security robot in the arena. It was also what Angron took out of the security robot's head when he was extremely angry and destroyed the security robot after killing 2 gladiators with his own hands, and returned to the cave to give to Qin Xia. Qin Xia picked up the gift and looked at it carefully. It seems that the security intelligent machine can also be mass-produced by the Nuserians, so this thing is definitely not a technological black box from a technical perspective. This means it can be hacked, used, and modified. At this moment, Qin Xia suddenly remembered something from the past. At that time, he was in the White Scars chapter, doing odd jobs repairing various small equipment for the chapter in order to understand the technological creations of mankind in the interstellar era. Originally, a child was not qualified to touch the sacred items of the Emperor's angels, but at that time there was a technical priest sent by the Mechanikus in the regiment. The technical priest always urged Qin Xia to go to the Mechanikus as an international student after becoming a space marine, and after returning, become a technical sergeant to serve the god of all machines. The think tank's idea was also indispensable in this matter. He taught Qin Xia a little trick using psychic power to deceive the technical priest and make the priest think that Qin Xia and the god of all things have a natural affinity. With the opportunity to work as a technical handyman for the technical priest, Qin Xia was also able to get involved in maintenance work. Your motorcycle is broken, man, and it can't be repaired until the strike cruiser returns to Chuanzhou Fortress and can get parts from the fortress. Qin Xia still remembered that he said this to a White Scar soldier who crashed his motorcycle on the battlefield. Then, when the White Scar warrior fell into panic and anxiety, Qin Xia said, "But I remember that the priest still has some spare parts in stock. However, he is a member of the Mechanics after all. You know, the other head of the two-headed eagle, it is not easy to ask him for help. But I am a handyman for the priest after all. If you ask me to help you steal, no, help you coordinate the parts from the priest's warehouse, that's fine." The White Scar warrior was immediately overjoyed and asked Qin Xia what he wanted. "Aren't you the guard for the Prophet Baratai? Let me go into his room and read a couple of books and I'll help you coordinate." Recalling the joy of the past, Qin Xia laughed out loud, and then hurried to work. He began to modify the intelligent mechanical processor in his hand, connecting it with a data board, observing its internal structure with psychic vision and understanding and analyzing the various functions of its internal structure. Use the tools currently in the warehouse to make some simple parts, weld them or implant them into the internal structure of the processor. These things are difficult, but not impossible. Chapter 45. Plan. 6 hours passed. Qin Xia stumbled for a long time and finally added a backdoor to the intelligent processor that could be used for control. However, during this bumpy process, Qin Xia gained two things. First of all, it is the understanding of the security intelligent machinery technology used by the Nuserians. Qin Xia discovered that the technology used by the security intelligent machinery looked quite high-end, but in the Nuserian slave society, which did not attach importance to the popularization of scientific and technological knowledge and the cultivation of scientific research talents, there was a reason why this technology had not been lost. Because its designers cancelled many functions that could have been expanded, freeing up a lot of structure to serve its ease of use and design. When Qin Xia disassembled the processor, he found that every structure inside was marked with bilingual symbols in Nuserian and another Latin language. This allowed Qin Xia to understand that this processor was a hub that integrated a wide range of functions. And when you want to write action logic, programs, backdoors, or anything else that needs coding, you just need to find a way to write the requirements in the place marked as the logic block in the center of the processor. For example, if you want the security intelligent machine to farm or mine, you can write words related to the profession in the natural language of any human race, such as mining intelligent machine, mining robot, mining worker, resource mining worker, and then the built-in program in the processor will write the relevant functions inside the processor. If Qin Xia was just writing a program like making a wish, it wouldn't take him 6 hours. But he wanted the processor to be able to remotely control it for him, and disguise himself, and hack into anything he needed to hack, not just omnics, but equipment, sentry guns, or whatever the hell it was. So most of the time was spent on modifying the processor. This is the first harvest. The second gain was that Qin Xia became more and more adept at using his spiritual powers. Because there is no research environment comparable to that of a laboratory and no equipment here, it is extremely difficult to observe and transform. Qin Xia learned to use psychic energy to do things that could only be done with instruments and equipment, and he found that the results were unexpectedly good. The experience in the use of psychic power accumulated in this process also brought Qin Xia one step closer to the goal he had set long ago to make psychic power no longer restricted to a specific way of use, but to be able to use it as one pleases, just like using chopsticks or a cup when eating or drinking. Do whatever you want. If an ordinary psychic dared to do this, he would think his head was too heavy and didn't want to do it, but Qin Xia could use his psychic power in this way. One last thing. Qin Xia put the processor into his backpack and looked outside the manor. A large number of lights enveloped the estate. The guards approached the manor in formation. Some combat intelligent machines, smart vehicles, and the like are also gathering, preparing to advance towards the manor behind the guards' formation. There is no doubt that the current situation is that the movement at the manor has been discovered, so the troops stationed nearby began to escort the safety of the nobles. Maybe after Aaron died, something on his body could send out a signal. In short, Qin Xia was certain that he would face a siege. He was looking forward to it. Half an hour later, the Nuserian army, which used advanced weapons and equipment but had extremely backward military systems and tactics, finally gathered 1,000 men near the manor. After ensuring that all of them could be put into battle, they began searching the manor. Even the military system of these people is very backward. They look like guards, but they are only a small number of real guards, like Silver Ivy. Most of them were slaves and personal guards of the guards. This simple guard tried to find the family members, guards, or other people related to the person in charge of the arena and then shelter them. The reason they came here was to find that the manor had been invaded, so they came to protect the nobles. But after searching for a long time, the manor was dead silent and they found nothing. The officers of the guards shouted as the enemies lurking in the dark could launch a decapitation attack at any time, but no one paid any attention to him. Qin Xia did not attack them for the time being, but was making the final arrangements for his trip to the manor. He picked up the explosives from some of the bodies on the ground and put the invisible camouflage cloak used by the previous person in charge on the backpack behind him. The invisible camouflage cloak could not cover Qin Xia's body, so Qin Xia chose to use it to cover things that he valued more: the spoils in his backpack, the data tablet filled with digital versions of books, and the processor he had just modified. After completing his preparations, Qin Xia stood in the dark corner of the top floor of the manor building, looking down at the enemies who were searching the manor below. They are the last goal Qin Xia wants to achieve in the manor. Since entering the arena, Qin Xia has thought about various plans for the future. What should I do after I escape from the arena with Angron and the gladiators? Escaping from the Colosseum was still not just an escape for the sake of escaping from the Colosseum, because he had long realized that the Colosseum was not the cruelest hell in Nuseria, and the enemies in the Colosseum were not the most terrifying enemies that the gladiators would face. So Qin Xia had figured out what to do after escaping from the arena. Occasionally in the arena, some ships can be seen passing by outside the Nuseria sky. Therefore, the first plan Qin Xia came up with was to develop a detailed plan from escaping from the arena to forcibly boarding the ship and seizing control of the ship. If the ship cannot navigate in the subspace and is only used for communication between several planets in the galaxy where Nuseria is located, then find a normal place to stay on another planet in the galaxy. If the ship can navigate the warp, so much the better. Qin Xia decided to find a way to act as a navigator and take all the gladiators on a long journey. The end of the journey is Makraj, the core of the future 500 worlds of Ultramar, a place with a harmonious government, a decent civilization even now. By then, Angron could work with Guilliman to form a kingdom within a kingdom, to grow and cooperate together. If Nuseria and its surrounding areas could be conquered in the future, when the Horus Heresy comes, the 500 worlds of Ultramar could form a Southeast Mutual Protection Alliance with Nuseria or something like that. This is one of Qin Xia's plans for the future, and the name of this plan is Run Maklug. There was another plan, which was to fight the slave owners to the death in Nuseria. If they really have to stay and fight to the death, the gladiators, the rebels, they cannot fight guerrilla warfare. This is caused by the objective environment and material basis. Any attempt by Nuseria civilians to sympathize with or help the gladiators would be punished by extermination by the Nuseria slave owners, who did not need the civilians' support at all. Therefore, Qin Xia came up with a plan called beheading. That is, he formed a team with Angron and other gladiators who were good at fighting, and carried out an extermination attack and revenge on the slave owners in Nuseria. With psychic power and the amazing individual combat capabilities of the primarches. Just like today, enter a noble's estate, kill them, and then escape while being chased by a large army. This is the last thing Qin Xia is going to do in the manor. Try and learn how to use your Shinik talents and all the resources at hand to fight your way out of the encirclement of the army after completing a decapitation. Psychics are dangerous. Instability is not the only reason they are hated. Even a moderately skilled individual among them is capable of wreaking horrific havoc and doing terrible things that many soldiers together could not do. The think tank's teachings echoed in Qin Xia's ears. Qin Xia took out a long string of explosives tied with ropes from his backpack and hung it on his chest. Frost spread across the top of the building. Qin Xia's eyes were filled with a light as white as snow as he looked down at the guards below who heard the beeping sound of the wizard's detector. Now I'll show you. Chapter 46. Hardcore evacuation. What? The officer was walking slowly as if he was taking a stroll in the manor, looking around, and suddenly his eyes were fixed on the top of the manor building. A black shadow fell from the sky, from the top of the building. Before the officer could see what it was, he felt a punch to his mouth. He was indeed hit in the mouth by something, but it was not a fist, but a grenade. The round grenade was thrown by Qin Xia as he fell, and it went straight through the lower half of the officer's face and embedded deeply into his skull. The slaves and guards brought by the officer were closest to him, so they naturally witnessed the scene first and then shouted, "Hide!" The explosion swallowed up the second half of the words and also swallowed up the people around the officer. Above the boiling red sand, in the dark and cold manor, the explosion illuminated this gloomy place for a moment. Everyone else pointed their guns at the place where the explosion occurred, and the next second Qin Xia rushed out from the flames and smoke. The snow-white psychic light was in a translucent arc shape, covering Qin Xia's body. When his figure appeared on the enemy's retina and was transmitted by the optic nerve, the shrapnel and bone fragments produced in the explosion just now were sliding down his psychic barrier. Fire! A soldier yelled and pulled the trigger, and a beam of blazing energy shot out from the muzzle. Qin Xia ran forward wildly. Every time he took a step of several meters, he would reach out and pull a grenade from the strap he had just tied to his body. There was no pulling of the safety, just taking it off and throwing it. There were a few muffled sounds, and several people were hit by several grenades at the same time. Whether it was the head, the heart, or other vital parts, in short, before those who were hit were killed by the explosion like the previous officer, they had already been killed by Qin Xia with grenades. A series of explosions occurred again. The whole manor was covered with smoke. The army, mixed with a large number of slaves and guards brought by the regular guards, was obviously in disarray. The chaotic situation made them think they were under a large-scale attack. Qin Xia judged that the guards would counterattack, but in fact it was not the case. These were just troops that had been stationed peacefully in the suburbs of Dazia for a long time and had never even massacred the rebels. When faced with an attack, the regular guards would choose to yell at their slaves or guards to go find someone to kill, while they themselves would turn the silver vines into shields to cover their bodies. Qin Xia emerged from the smoke again and threw another grenade. The grenade flew into the body again and exploded again. In this way, Qin Xia was getting closer and closer to the exit of the manor. Only after throwing the last grenade did Qin Xia maintain his psychic barrier again and pass through the explosion unscathed. This series of events, from the first step, that is, the moment Qin Xia jumped off the building, to the last grenade explosion, the total time it took was 3.2 seconds. Nuserian's black technology does not include things like grenades, and it does not automatically detect the right time to explode without pulling the safety. Qin Xia had pulled all the safety pins before jumping down, because he was confident that he could accomplish his goal with grenades before all the explosives exploded. The Astartes body gave him the ability to do this. The enemy was thrown into complete confusion, with only a few experienced men in high vantage points and equipped with advanced observation equipment able to react. For example, people who drive four-legged combat machines. These machines, which were not particularly amazing, were equipped with different heavy weapons, such as the large-caliber heavy machine guns that Qin Xia had seen before, and machines equipped with very long gun barrels that were obviously armor-piercing weapons. There were 7 in total, all firing at Qin Xia, who was surrounded by the smoke. Some slaves and guards brought by the guards were accidentally shot and killed, but the silver vine of the guards who were not far from Qin Xia were able to withstand those attacks. Large-caliber armor-piercing artillery weapons can even create smoke due to the powerful kinetic energy of the shells. Qin Xia was exposed. He was holding up a psychic barrier, and the artillery fire hitting it could only cause a few white ripples but could not penetrate at all. The four-legged combat machines maintained fire suppression, while the nearby infantry went around behind Qin Xia and concentrated their fire on him. Even the rifle carried by the lowest slave here is enough to penetrate the thin armor 2 kilometers away, and the muzzle and the attack point form an absolutely straight ray, but they just gathered together, piled together like soldiers in the flintlock era, next to each other, and concentrated their fire on one target. The concentrated firepower of these people even killed and injured many of their own people. Qin Xia raised one hand to maintain the psychic barrier in front of him, and stretched the other hand behind him to hold up the barrier to resist the concentrated fire. The fire from the energy rifles left scarlet marks on the crystal white barrier. As these marks became more and more numerous, they gradually covered up the original color of the barrier. Qin Xia glanced at the infantry behind him and turned his head again. The red energy traces on the barrier behind him moved to the front, gathering into a beam of light that pierced through the four-legged machine in front of him, and then swept across again until the accumulated energy was exhausted. Immediately, the psychic barrier behind Qin Xia disappeared, and was replaced by a psychic lightning released from his fingertips. White psychic lightning burst out, and the group of people who were focusing their fire on Qin Xia had their material existence wiped out in an instant. Their souls burned in the bursting psychic sparks, and their bodies did not turn into ashes, but became snowflakes that burst out in all directions and slowly fell. Qin Xia looked ahead and saw that the psychic barrier was still maintained, resisting the attack. Facing the dense firepower network, he took a step forward, with an aggressive look as if he was seeking revenge. But then an enemy 100 meters ahead moved a four-legged machine, which instantly extended its support frame and opened fire after entering an absolutely stable state. A shell hit Qin Xia's psychic barrier. At the moment of the explosion, a huge amount of fragments swept over Qin Xia's position and behind him like a storm. Many people turned into blood mist that spread along with the smoke and dust. However, something spread out before the shell exploded, dispersing in the air and making its existence invisible. In a circular area with a diameter of 10 meters, the air was ignited in a strictly restricted manner, and the flames instantly engulfed Qin Xia. But then Qin Xia rushed out from the dense smoke and dust. His huge and strong body was astonishingly and unexpectedly fast. His body did not slow down his speed at all, but the benefits of his huge body such as the impact force were retained. Qin Xia smashed a dozen enemies along the way to pieces with his shoulder. In the blink of an eye, he rushed to the four-legged machine that fired the shot just now, and then changed the direction of his sprint. The bare feet and torso turned 90 degrees at the same time, and then left a footprint on the ground. At the same time, when Qin Xia turned and took a new step, the shock wave, along with the stones that were shattered by his steps and burst into the surroundings, blew away everything around him. The four-legged machine could not fly as high as a mortal body. It drew an arc in the air and then collided with another four-legged machine next to it. Ammunition exploded. The light from the explosion illuminated Qin Xia's face and the vision of others, but the figure who was killing everyone remained a black shadow in the eyes of others. Qin Xia looked around with sharp eyes. After witnessing the panic and chaos of the enemy, he realized that although he had not left the manor yet, the purpose of evacuation had been achieved because no one could stop him. Chapter 47. Yakuro. Stop him! Someone growled. The howler was struck by lightning and turned into drifting snowflakes. Kill him for me! An officer yelled. The next second, the officer saw his guard being approached by Qin Xia's shadow. The shadow then dodged the rifle in the guard's hand and pierced the guard's neck with the muzzle, as if pulling the trigger with his mind, and then shot the officer behind the guard. When a black shadow passed by someone, he lowered his head to check if his body was intact, and suddenly found that his body was fine, but the safety of the grenade on his waist was gone. Then he died in the explosion along with the people nearby. No one could stop the shadow from raiding and approaching. The battle seemed very fierce. However, Qin Xia did not even use the weapon he had placed behind him under the invisibility cloak he had seized from the person in charge. Whether it was in the backpack or the heavy machine guns and beam cannons on his back. Because he wanted to take these things back and leave them for people who were not as powerful as him to use. But it's just bare hands. With just his strong physique and psychic powers, Qin Xia was able to create this astonishing destruction, starting with him killing everyone in the manor, and now he is on the verge of breaking out. Psychic power is very strong and terrifying. The physical fitness of Astartes, a superhuman warrior, is equally terrifying. It was not until this futile encirclement and suppression that everyone realized that it was impossible for them to stop the Black Shadow. If the Black Shadow wanted to, he could kill everyone present, but doing so would waste a very long time. Qin Xia had no intention of killing everyone. He had learned a little bit of experience from fighting with so many people and how to break out of the encirclement when being surrounded. These people were not strong enough, nor were they enough for him to verify his idea if he encountered a real guard of a Nuserian slave-owning aristocrat, rather than the rotten army surrounding the inferior people in the aristocratic group such as the person in charge of the arena, he would be able to evacuate smoothly 100%. But experience must be accumulated, and things must be done bit by bit. Everyone needs to grow and learn. Qin Xia is only good at one thing, not scientific research, nor psychic power, but research and learning. He is particularly good at it. Far away outside the manor, more people have learned about what happened here, and they began to mobilize troops here. Before these people arrived and joined the encirclement, Qin Xia had already killed any enemies who dared to set up obstacles in his way during this hardcore evacuation. A natural phenomenon that ordinary Nuserian people could never see, snow, fell from the sky on a small scale, landing in an environment where the temperature dropped sharply. Qin Xia entered the snowstorm, and his figure was gradually covered by it. An anti-gravity flying vehicle similar to a helicopter is parked in the wilderness. The flying vehicle projected an invisible force field in all directions. Outside the circular area of 20 meters, no one could see what was here, except Qin Xia's psychic vision. When Qin Xia came here and penetrated the invisible force field like water waves, he saw this anti-gravity flying vehicle and a person leaning next to the flying vehicle. That man was Tark's guard. Qin Xia had seen this guy before. This guy has cable-like iron hair on his head, and you can tell at a glance that he has been branded with butcher's nails. If Angron also hits the butcher's nail, he will also grow the same hair. But this man showed no signs of madness or anger. He quietly leaned against the flying vehicle. When he saw Qin Xia approaching, he opened his eyes and asked in a calm tone, "Did you finish it? Kill them all." Qin Xia raised his head with contempt in his eyes, "Alan, he may be your main target, but I found out that this manor belongs to the person in charge of the Dexia arena, so I killed the person in charge as well." Qin Xia walked towards the flying vehicle and said, "If the person in charge doesn't deserve to die in your opinion, I don't care. He was there, so I killed him." "Wait." The man who had been hit by the butcher's nail raised his hand, looking surprised, "You killed Alan as well?" Qin Xia raised her eyebrows and looked at him, the expression on her face seemed to say, "Are you fucking kidding me? Turk cooperated with you just to kill the person in charge, not to kill his brother. His brother hasn't even shown him the pain of losing all his offspring, and you killed him," he said. Qin Xia frowned, "No. You agreed to the 3 conditions, and I am willing to kill a noble, but in the end you just want to kill the person in charge of the arena, not Alon Tark, the great noble whose descendants were killed by that crazy patriarch. Why is Aaron there?" The man looked confused. "This is the manner of the person in charge. Why do you think we want you to kill Aaron Tark?" Qin Xia's face showed deep confusion and astonishment. He didn't have this expression when facing those enemies just now. But now, facing the guy in front of him who had been hit by the butcher's nails, Qin Xia had such an expression on his face just because of a few words from this bastard who for some reason didn't go crazy after being hit by the nails. The reason why Chief Tark wanted you to kill the person in charge was because he disobeyed. The chief asked him to send his wife and daughter to the cave to participate in the delayed carnival, but he didn't do it. The chief's spy said that this guy secretly cancelled the carnival and distributed bandages instead. The man explained, "He was still waiting to see Aaron Tark's performance, but you killed him too. Get out of here." Qin Xia's expression relaxed and he approached the flying vehicle with an indifferent look. The man with a nail on his head didn't say much. He turned around, opened the cockpit door of the aircraft, and motioned Qin Xia to get in. However, before getting on the plane, Qin Xia suddenly hesitated, "How good are you at flying a helicopter? I can't even break through the encirclement of more than 1,000 people, and finally die in the wreckage of this thing." Qin Xia had a psychological trauma against flying vehicles since he was a child. He still remembered why he lost his family and was sent to an orphanage in his first life in the 21st century. "Call me ace pilot Mr. Brown." The man blew his cable-like iron hair, smiled confidently, and got on the helicopter. "Drive slowly, Mr. Zabayan." Qin Xia got on the flying vehicle. Brown placed his hand on the dashboard filled with densely packed instruments and started the vehicle with just a light tap. "Don't be nervous. I specialize in driving this, and I have driven it countless times. If it were someone else, there would be a 0.01% chance that this thing would crash, but it won't happen with me. So you're Yajuro, the opposite of Zobayang. I don't know where you are from. Don't use your local jokes with me. I don't understand." Chapter 48. Fake Butcher's Nails? The flying vehicle is flying in the air. Qin Xia lay in the co-pilot's seat, his head against the seat, his eyes closed, recalling the battle he had just had, and looking for shortcomings in the battle. The Tark guard with the butcher's nails named Brown beside him drove the vehicle calmly and methodically, as if he had become one with the vehicle. For a moment, Qin Xia wondered why Brown could remain so calm after being hit by the butcher's nails, but it was only a momentary puzzlement. There are also people who remain calm after being hit by the butcher's nails, such as a world eater warrior named Thorax. This bastard is not only able to think calmly after being hit by the butcher's nails, but he even knows to run away instead of seeking death when he can't win. Although the butcher's nails used by Thorax were a low-end version developed by Galen, a pharmacist of the World Eaters, it was still outrageous. Maybe the Brown next to me has been hit with a similar butcher's nail, a low-end version, or simply a fake. And Brown also occasionally observed Qin Xia. Brown didn't notice what Qin Xia was carrying. He didn't even notice why Qin Xia was so strong and yet could sit on a chair designed for ordinary people like an ordinary person without feeling out of place at all. It's not all because of the invisibility cloak. Qin Xia had not received any systematic psychic learning and training before and after being abducted from the White Scars by the Grey Knights and transformed into a Grey Knight, but the think tank of the White Scars still taught him a lot. For example, how to use Shinix to make a space marine, who is very different from ordinary people, less awkward and inconvenient in life, use Shinix to change the body's adaptability to the environment, such as straightening one's back and walking into a 2-meter high door. This is not particularly difficult, especially for a psychic like Qin Xia. Both of them were silent for a long time, and finally Brown spoke first. By the way, I thought you would be particularly resistant to cooperating with the head of the Taco family. Hearing this, Qin Xia remained silent and pretended to be very sincere. My gladiator brothers and sisters can no longer tolerate the damn rule of fasting day. They also need medicine, and someone I care about needs to repair a short limb, so I will suppress my resistance. And beneath Qin Xia's sincere appearance, there is no false friendship hidden, such as indifference to the gladiators. What he hid was that he was actually looking forward to the opportunity to leave the arena, because he could do so many things with this opportunity. Oh! Brown nodded slightly. It was not known whether it was because of this answer that he felt something was wrong, or because he felt the atmosphere was too awkward, so he touched the iron hair hanging from the back of his head, those cables coming from the butcher's nails in his brain. Won't this thing drive you crazy? Qin Xia finally couldn't help but ask this question. You mean the butcher's nail? Brown said, no, it won't work on me, but if it's on someone else, the person who has it implanted will become a complete murderer, because this thing will make the person who has it implanted feel like he is in hell if he doesn't kill. Qin Xia suddenly turned around and stared at Brown. You. Qin Xia recalled something. The butcher's nail is not for human use. There is a speculation that it is some kind of neural structure implant in the stone man to control the stone man. The so-called stone man, like the Iron Man, is actually an intelligent machine. Stone man means a synthetic man, not a man made of stone. Are you a stone man? Qin Xia asked tentatively. Brown was stunned by the question, and for a few seconds, he asked back, you didn't know I was a stone man? I thought you were an alien psychic so you could tell I was a stone man, and I didn't intend to lie to you, but you didn't know. If I had known, I would have pretended to be crazy. Qin Xia was stunned for a few seconds. The stone men once served humanity when it was still at its peak. Before humanity fell into the abyss, it was the Iron Man rebellion that interrupted humanity's prosperity. The stone men sided with the humans during the Iron Man rebellion, but were either eliminated or disappeared after the rebellion was quelled. What followed was a large-scale warp storm that caused warp navigation to become completely chaotic and terrifying, and humans fell into the abyss due to the inability to communicate. Qin Xia never dreamed that he would actually discover a stone man. Can you scan my genes? Qin Xia suddenly had an idea. If I'm not mistaken, you will find that I am different from others. Qin Xia remembered that when he traveled to 40,000 years ago, he was still in physical form, but his soul was contained in the body of his childhood that seemed to have been rejuvenated. Of course I can see that, which is why I am sure you are not from Nuseria. Brown nodded. Then, are there any technological treasures waiting for me to unlock? Qin Xia asked anxiously, or, are there any iron men or stone men like you who can help me since I am an ancient human? Brown raised his left eyebrow and scratched the synthetic skull that contained the butcher's nail. There shouldn't be any treasure, unless your direct ancestor left you a legacy with a gene lock. As for helping you, if we are friends, of course I can, otherwise, why? I am different from other humans. You can see it from my genes. Modern humans have undergone a lot of genetic modifications, and I have also undergone modifications, but I still carry the genetic samples of primitive humans, said Qin Xia. It's indeed different. Brown was still confused. If it was 20K now, I would find a way to bring you to a research institute in a nearby human colony and help you get a very good labor contract, so that you can make gene copies for them, or go to a university to assist an archaeological professor in research. But now you have seen what the human race looks like. Where can I find such a civilized place for you to use them as research samples or for archaeological professionals to assist in research? Now is a chaotic era. Ancient things are either squandered or buried. You have to wait until the peaceful and civilized era in the future to explore the value of your ancient genes. Brown drove the flying vehicle while looking at Qin Xia. Qin Xia was silent. He thought that it was a classic fantasy that ancient humans would be worshipped as treasures by emperors or stone men and iron men. Before asking, Qin Xia didn't believe the saying that ancient humans were extremely valuable, but the stone man was right next to him, so he had to ask as long as he could find a way to get out of the current predicament, even if the hope was slim, he was willing to try and verify it. I still can't believe I ran into a stone man. After a moment of silence, Qin Xia spoke again. This is too unexpected. Shouldn't you have been extinct long ago? Functional extinction, that's right. Brown nodded, but no matter how exterminated, there will always be a few fish that slip through the net. The Nuserians are quite civilized. They didn't regard me as a potential threat and killed me after the Iron Man Rebellion. Chapter 49. Synthetic Man. Even so, I still find it hard to believe. Qin Xia looked at Brown, sizing him up and down. A synth, a stone man. It helped humans build a brilliant space civilization and develop amazingly advanced technologies that are now considered technological black boxes. A survivor of such a species, serving as a pilot and escort for a mad slaver on Nuseria. I actually thought you might be the 30K version of Zabian. How could a stone man not be able to fly a plane properly? Brown felt quite benefited when listening to Qin Xia's praise and admiration for the stone man. As for being the bodyguard for Chief Tark, the stone man tapped his head and said, part of the reason is because of the butcher's nail. This thing is used to control me. Speaking of which, the theme world staff who invented it probably didn't expect that someone in the future would put this thing into the head of a natural person. What does the theme world mean? Qin Xia caught a word in Brown's words that puzzled him. Nukria was a theme park more than 19,000 years ago. Brown answered calmly, this world itself is an amusement park. Back then, this galaxy was managed by an entertainment industry company called Nukria. The company hired a large number of employees, and then carried out bioengineering on them to strengthen them so that they could accept more cruel and terrible things, such as playing the role of gladiators in ancient Roman culture, nobles who indulged in debauchery every day, and one of the symbolic cultures of Rome was oppression of slaves, or something similar. I agree with your praise and appreciation for the stone people, but if you think that I, a stone man, and my compatriots who don't know where to go are scientists or managers, then you are wrong. We are just non-natural employees who were created to play some kind of amusement park role with natural employees. Hearing this, Qin Xia stared at Brown in astonishment, but continued listening without interrupting. Brown continued. Some tourists will play the role of slave owners and have fun by abusing the staff, and some tourists will play the role of slaves and have fun by being abused by the staff. There are also PvP modes where you play as a general to suppress a slave uprising, or as a slave uprising to fight against the nobles. Then, after a cruel game, the natural person will be anesthetized with a drug, and then his memory will be erased with another drug. Listening to what Brown said, Qin Xia felt as if he had traveled through time again. Because the entertainment industry companies, theme park worlds, role-playing, games that Brown was talking about, these things are incompatible with the current situation of this world called Nukria. After all, Nuseria had changed from an amusement park, where tourists could leave freely and return to their normal lives after playing the roles of slaves or nobles, to a living hell where no one could escape. Sitting in this extremely advanced aircraft, Qin Xia felt like he had turned into a cruel, crazy tourist who came to this world to play tens of thousands of years ago when humans were still at their peak. Then Nukria 1, which is our world. The world's northern hemisphere was packaged and sold to another company, and the other company opened a desert nomadic tribal cultural playground in the northern hemisphere. So don't go to the northern hemisphere easily. There are giant desert worms and such there. But the High Knights often capture people and send them into the stomachs of worms for fun. There is no use being more careful about this matter. As for the later subspace storm that paralyzed the FTL navigation system and led to the decline of civilization, there is too much to talk about. We are almost at the arena in Dizia. I will tell you next time when I have the chance to pick you up or drop you off. Brown is clearly a chatterbox. He does not have his own natural personality like a natural person. Perhaps the humans who created him have set up such a personality program for him. Then let Brown be the commentator and guide of the theme park. Qin Xia could guess this. Brown's next words brought him back to reality, back to the cruel and hellish Nuseria. Whatever it was, this place is different now. Just like other human worlds after the subspace storm destroyed the FTL travel system, this place has become corrupt, ignorant, dark, and cruel. Back then, the security forces of the amusement park proclaimed themselves nobles because they had the most and strongest forces, and enslaved other humans, whether they were former employees of the company or tourists, they were all enslaved by them. Over time, even the Nuseria themselves forgot how civilized they once were. Qin Xia couldn't help but interrupt, wait, a place for tourists to engage in strange and entertaining activities doesn't seem civilized, right? That's true. Brown nodded in agreement. But I was designed to serve humans, just like the stone men. I won't make any moral judgments on human entertainment. Even though the company's complaints department became slaves enslaved by security personnel more than 10,000 years ago, I still have to maintain this initial setting. Qin Xia did not respond, digesting what he heard. He had actually wondered why Nuseria was such a terrible place. He also thought that Nuseria might have once been a theme park of some kind. Because the home planet where another primarch landed is also suspected to have been a theme park during the heyday of humanity, and that is Fenris where Russ is now. A theme park of Northern Europe and Viking culture. But this is just a speculation, a suspicion. Only Nukria, Qin Xia confirmed it from the mouth of the stone man next to him. Of course, we cannot rule out the possibility that this chatterbox is talking nonsense. After thinking about it, Qin Xia decided to ask something more important in the current hellish Nukria. Why would a stone man like you serve a specific noble? It's not just because of the butcher's nails, right? Qin Xia asked. Of course not. Brown shook his head. The ancestors of the Turk family were once enslaved. Under the guidance of my compatriots, their ancestors found some powerful weapons and equipment that were nearly 20,000 years old. Then they overthrew the slave owners and became slave owners themselves. I have been the butler of the Taco family since then, serving generations of patriarchs, and now it is the turn of this Taco patriarch. It should be said that the current Turk is very similar to his ancestors. They both have pity on slaves and hate nobles and authority. But I think that the hatred that this Turk has for the nobles now comes more from his experiences in his childhood and youth. Seeing that Brown was about to go off topic again, Qin Xia brought the topic back on track. Where are your compatriots? They disappeared, just disappeared one day, without a trace, Brown said. They were worshipped as gods, and then suddenly one day they disappeared, and I was the only one left in Nuseria. Did you kill them? Qin Xia suddenly asked. If I had the ability, I would have turned Nuseria back to the amusement park it once was. Brown answered lightly, I am indeed good at fighting, but my compatriots who played gladiators, generals and soldiers long ago are better at fighting. If they were here, even if we were all controlled by the butcher's nail, we could work together to turn Nuseria back to the amusement park it once was. Now that the warp storm has dissipated, the storm that turned the human race into a barbaric and ignorant nation scattered across the galaxy will no longer affect FTL travel. If Nuseria becomes the amusement park it once was, new visitors will surely come. Impossible. Qin Xia interrupted Brown again. This hellhole is now a place where a bunch of slave owners are using the products left over from the peak era of the human race to enslave and slaughter civilians everywhere. Under normal circumstances, civilians will never be able to overthrow the slave owners' hell. Besides, the so-called amusement park you mentioned is not really an amusement park at all. It's just a hell for crazy tourists to have fun. Hearing Qin Xia's cruel words, Brown didn't react much. It was obvious that he knew it all, but he was still mentally immersed in the past. You're right. Brown nodded slightly. This stone man has a large number of implants that are incompatible with his original limbs. It seems that it is not only the place of Nuseria that has been changed over the past tens of thousands of years, but also him. But the last hell is my home. Chapter 50. Madman. The flying vehicle slowly landed on the apron inside the arena. The security robots walked out in a line, ready to escort Qin Xia back to the cave. Before getting off the plane, Brown patted Qin Xia on the back and said, "Go back without worry, great inventor. The detection devices along the way to the cave cannot detect your little technological creations hidden under the invisible cloak. You can bring them back safely without my company." A hint of surprise flashed across Qin Xia's face, and then he nodded, "Okay, Mr. Zabayan, I wish you a pleasant flight." "What does this mean?" Brown asked. "Ace pilot." Qin Xia replied. "That's good." Brown smiled brightly. Qin Xia looked at Brown again, opened the cabin door and jumped down, walking towards the inner part of the arena under the surveillance of the security intelligent machine. Brown also got off the aircraft and leaned against the outer shell of the aircraft, just like when Qin Xia and he first met, watching Qin Xia leave. Qin Xia had another question to ask and subconsciously looked back at Brown. However, Qin Xia had already walked quite far in just a few steps, so he couldn't ask any questions now. "Goodbye." Brown raised his hand and waved. Qin Xia nodded, turned around and continued walking. At this moment, both Brown and Qin Xia felt that the conversation they had just had during the journey was quite pleasant. Brown usually pretends to be a madman. Sometimes, when he gets tired of pretending, he pretends to be the butcher's nail for a few minutes without torturing himself and acts like a normal person for a while. Whether it was Turk or anyone else, he had no one with whom he could have a comfortable conversation. Go and maintain my aircraft. Now. Right fucking now. Qinxia heard Brown roaring at the arena staff. But that voice always sounded a little reluctant in Qinxia's ears. When Qinxia walked to the straight corridor leading to the cave, he suddenly saw the patriarch of the Tark family and a man who looked like the person in charge of the new arena walking together. The two of them talked and laughed and had a very pleasant conversation. That bastard was pretended to obey me. He sold the things I rewarded him to the bastards of the Julius family. The Julius family might use my things as supplies for the curse ritual, but it's okay. I'll just put up with it. But that bastard lied to me. He said he sent his wife and daughter into the cave to spend their carnival days. But in fact no. I just said it in anger, you know? I don't want to treat him so cruelly. He can choose not to send his wife and daughter to prison, and then tell me honestly, oh, I'm sorry, my master, I didn't follow your order, please kill me. It doesn't matter. I can let him go or even reward him because of his honesty and his honesty in not fearing being killed by me. Turk kept talking, with a painful expression on his face. The new person in charge next to him had a blank expression on his face, just nodded and agreed. Even among the group of yes men, this kind of person would be the lowest type. Look who's back. Tark stopped and looked at Qinxia enthusiastically, opening his arms. Did you kill the whole family of the person in charge? Of course, Qinxia did not go up to hug Tark, who stretched out his arms, but stood where he was, looking down at the most powerful man in Nukria. Indeed. Qinxia nodded, no one is left in the manor. He didn't leave his daughter behind either. Tark suddenly looked sad. His daughter was fostered in my home for a year when she was little. My wife and I loved her very much, but you actually killed her too. Qinxia nodded. To be honest, he wasn't sure. Maybe the person in charge's daughter went out and didn't come back. He was too lazy to find the body and investigate. Ancestors. Tark's tears fell like beads from a broken string. I have done something wrong again. Why can't these things always go as smoothly and rigorously as I wish? The new person in charge patted Turk on the back. Since everyone is dead, I have to cheer myself up. Tark took a deep breath and raised his head, as if to let the tears flow back. Besides, that little girl is not a good person. She has killed many people. Let her die. Turk instantly returned to normal, and his enthusiastic expression returned. I want to invite you to my brother's house, and we'll watch him perform together to see what his expression was like when all his sons died. As he spoke, Turk gestured and danced. You're the one who killed all his sons. His show would have been more interesting if you'd gone. And then we killed him. Use your witchcraft. Turk moved his body left and right, pretending to break something with force. Tear off his head, too. By the way, can you only break heads? Can you break limbs or something? If you can, start from the hands and feet and break my brother little by little. If you can't, forget it. I won't force you. I know that your wizard's abilities are not so handy. Qinxia looked at Tark without saying a word. Madman. This is Qinxia's evaluation of Tark. He didn't know what this man had been through or how he had become the patriarch. He only knew that this man was crazy. The only benefit he had for ordinary people was that he still treated real slaves as humanoid creatures rather than a pile of excrement. Qinxia also couldn't help but sigh at the complexity of the situation. It is such a madman, a terrifying madman, who can get what he needs to achieve his goal, and what he can never get no matter how many days and nights he fights for the audience in the arena. Aaron is dead, said the new person in charge. What? Tark was stunned. He's dead, the person in charge repeated in a low voice. I just wanted to tell you about the report I received this morning. Turk stood there in bewilderment. His expression was as changeable as his personality, sometimes sad, sometimes happy, sometimes gloating, and sometimes fearful. It's okay. Tark reached out and patted Qinxia's arm gently. It doesn't matter if you kill him or not. Don't worry about the fact that he is my brother. When I was little, he and his father often tied me to a tree and used me as a target to chop me down. So I hate him. You don't have to worry about me taking revenge on you. But he is indeed my brother, and we had a very good relationship when we were very young. Anyway, I actually feel that he shouldn't have died. It wasn't his fault that he became like that. It was the fault of the environment. Alan. Turk was incoherent and hesitant. The new person in charge patted Turk on the back and whispered to him, "If you think he deserves to die, then he has to die. Even if you only have the thought of letting him die for a moment, he deserves to die. You are the master of the Turk family, the top noble among the top nobles. Everything in the Turk family is your private property that you can dispose of at will. It's just a person who died." "But Aaron is my brother." Turk whispered, "How could I?" "It's okay, master. His life is your private property, just like all the people and things of the entire Tark family, the nobles who serve the Tark family, and us slaves." The person in charge consoled sincerely. "You're right, brother. In any case, we are one step closer to my goal of slaughtering all the nobles." Tark's eyes were filled with tears and he took deep breaths continuously. "Thank you for comforting me." The person in charge nodded repeatedly. "I will achieve my goal, right?" Tark suddenly looked at Qinxia and asked sincerely, "You will help me too? After all, you hate them too, right?" Qinxia looked into Tark's eyes. This mental illness always makes him feel terrified. Lord Tark is not mentally stable right now. "If you have anything to say, please wait until later. I will make arrangements later." The new arena leader made a gesture of invitation. "You can go back first. If you have anything to say, please tell the communicator on the gate. I will listen and consider it." Qinxia walked past Tark. Tark looked at Qinxia's back and asked the person in charge, "He will help me, right? He and his gladiator friends?" "Yes, master, you have a great goal. So of course, there is no doubt about it." The new person in charge coaxed Turk like a child.